Again, being that we're doing this via Teams rather than any type in person, and it's just me today. I don't have a second companion here with me. If you have questions or comments today, easiest way will be just to simply unmute and ask away. As I show the slides in Teams, I can't see the chat area. So if you type anything in there, I won't see it unless I go over there to take a look on occasion. So better just to ask questions aloud as we come and go with that. What we want to cover today is what your role, whether you're sub-pay pool or pay pool, what your roles are, how information gets to you, what needs to get to you, and what you do with it once you have it. So we're going to start with just a little bit of a review, since it's been several months since we talked about, in a classroom setting at least, any of this, the CCAS process. And CCAS, again, the appraisal part of AcqDemo, contribution-based compensation and appraisal system, just to get our heads in the same space of what that is, and understand what our roles and responsibilities are. Specifically, it's going to be imperative within the pay pools that you are very familiar with your business rules. You have some very well-defined business rules that we have to operate within. And so be sure that you have a copy of those, whether you want that electronic or in print is certainly up to you. But within those business rules are also some key tools that we use within the pay pool. It has, for example, a table that says, what is each AcqDemo point worth? So if we're saying, for example, we're going to give somebody a proposal of a +2 score, what does that mean financially? That'll tell us. If we say we have an equivalent of GS 14 step 10, what does that mean in AcqDemo's terms between 0 and 100? What are the broadband ranges? Do we have any control points that we have to stop people at? All those things are predefined in the appendices of the business rules. There are tables of all of those things. At a minimum, you're going to want those, as well as a copy of the AcqDemo scoring criteria. And by that, I mean those factor pages. That has the scoring criteria for the pay pool scores, the categorical scores, and the numerical scores. We'll reference all of these things within our training today, but in your actual mock pay pool and your real pay pool, you're going to want hard copies of those things. So as well as the whole business rules document. The main job that we have within a pay pool is to evaluate the assessments that have been given to us, right? Employees have written a self-assessment, and the supervisors will have written an appraisal that supplements that. From that, we have to derive both the categorical score, meaning what group of people are we going to lump together to do our rank ordering. We're going to rank together if we have anybody in the category of 4 high. That's going to be a score from 96 to 100 that we can consider. How should we rank people and assign those scores? We'll rank 4 mediums, 4 lows, 3 highs, 3 mediums, etc. Wherever we have a categorical score that is approved, that is our grouping to do our rank ordering. So how do we do that? How do we come up with those first categorical scores? Then what criteria can we use to do our rank ordering? We talked about these things briefly in the supervisor class that we did once. But again, now that we actually have to really do it, let's just take a little bit deeper dive into that. I want to show briefly today, too, the spreadsheet that we have to use within the pay pool. It is ginormous. It is very complicated to use. We can narrow it down, though. But we have to know what is in it to begin with. And if we wanted to narrow it down, what would we do? The idea for that will be to do that all ahead of time. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes when we get to what the pay pool administrators' roles are within your pay pools. But it's a comprehensive review of how this whole process will work. And speaking with Don, we decided to break this up rather than do this in one really long day for everybody, sort of 2 half days. This one, just to talk about what the procedures and the policies and the tools are. And then another one coming up, which Don mentioned briefly before, the mock pay pool. I believe you know that you're aware that that is coming up. I think next month is the date, in which we're going to ask the volunteers to create self-assessments for us and supervisor appraisals for us. Don will go in and sort of assign some teaching point scores, if you will, on those, and we'll have those to use within the mock pay pool. So we have data that is actually from your workforce. We have data in our office that we give out sometimes for those classes, but it's just fake data that has nothing to do with your work. We found over the years that works okay if we have nothing better to use, but it's far better for you to analyze the value of contributions if it's the actual work that you work within on a day-to-day basis. So we'll have that for the next meeting. This one, just the informational background, and the next one, we'll actually do the process. That's our goal for these 2 half days. So with that, let me jump over to what we've talked about previously as far as what the CCAS process is, what the intent of it is. And I'm just going to drill through some concepts that sound simple, but we'll find when we actually go to do it, it doesn't separate out quite as easy as it does on paper. So what is the design overview, the cycle in our process? This year, as I think we talked in our previous classes, is going to be very different this year from next year. Next year is going to also be very different from 2 years from now. And I'll talk about what that means as we go through. We're going to have to always have the same thing in mind, though, which is, did we pay the employee appropriately for the time that we have to appraise? That's always our end goal. But we're going to have some differences these next couple of years to get us sort of settled in to where we kind of, it'll go much easier 2 to 3 years from now than it will go this year and next year. And then we'll talk specifically, what do the employees and supervisors do to get these documents to you? What does the pay pool administrator do to support you within the pay pools? What does the sub-pay pool do for that pay pool that has sub-pay pools anyway? What is that? So what do those 9 sub-pay pools do? And then whether we have sub-pay pool or not, what does the main pay pool do? So just a review of all this, and then we'll break it down and see it play out as we get through our training. So our first part, remember, this is a mission impact based system. So I know we talked a lot last time that we were together around coming up with some type of published mission goals document for the employees. I don't know if that happened or not. We don't have to answer that for me or not, but this is going to be the hardest part for everyone for a mind shift from what they're used to writing about to what they need to write about now, from what you're used to sort of adjudicating to what you need to adjudicate now, which is that we are not asking to know whether somebody did their job appropriately or not. That sounds odd at first, but AcqDemo actually assumes they did. And we don't need to know that. Again, as a compensation management system, as opposed to a performance management system. Employees who come from the GS world are used to being in a performance management system, especially once DPMAP asked us to do self-assessments and NSPS similar before that. But we still got pay raises based on time served. It didn't really matter what we wrote. We were going to get the same pay raise one way or the other. But it was a laundry list of the work that we did and if we did our job appropriately. AcqDemo gives us that as a basis and says, we assume if the employee is not on an improvement plan, they've been doing their job appropriately. So let's save all that writing time. Don't write about any of that whatsoever. We're giving you the fact that they did their job appropriately, unless we're told otherwise. Well, we need to know instead, when they're all done doing their job appropriately, so what was the term we used before? How did that move mission forward? Now, I had some conversations with some employees in St. Louis last I was there after the training was done. And we were trying to talk about this, saying, what is it that you do? And they would say what they were working on. And I said, well, why are you working on that? What is your leadership looking for you to accomplish when you're all done? And we had some of the training in the employee class, some of this conversation in the employee class as well, where it was really unclear to them, really, other than somebody told them to do it, and it was a good thing they felt to do, what it was that they were actually supposed to accomplish in that so what perspective. And that's where our struggle is going to be in the first couple of years when we're reading employee self-assessments, is that you have to rank order people based on value to the mission in your pay pools. Well, what is it that you're valuing? How are you determining one value is greater than another? That's what the employees want to know. They want to know when they're done doing their work, How are they going to explain the value to you and show that they did what you were looking for? The return on investment that you asked them to do this work for has been reached or not. That's the big difference here that we need to get everyone writing about, talking about, thinking about every single day. Since this is a mission impact rank order based system, what mission am I supposed to be impacting? And how am I going to speak to that to the pay pool to show that perhaps I do indeed deserve a salary increase rather than time being served and I get a pay increase based on that GSDP map. Now it's about moving mission forward and showing that I moved mission forward and might then should be considered for a pay increase. However, that's the employee's biggest burden, is to write about that difference. And they're not going to be good at it at first, I guarantee it. Some people will never actually become good at it. Some will learn. But most people are probably going to struggle this first go round. Your struggle is part 2. Just because they did something. This is in year 25 of the program, year 14 for me within this program. What I typically find is that from the supervisor and sometimes the pay pool perspective, if an employee did something good, that automatically means to them the employee should get a raise. And that's not necessarily true, right? At some point, what the employee is doing that is of value, they're actually being compensated appropriately for doing that. And so the language I use when I facilitate pay pools a lot is, isn't that what you would expect them to do? I don't understand why that is above and beyond. When I look at their job, their PRD that they're on, and I look at how much you're paying them, I would expect somebody to do that. That doesn't seem above and beyond to me. What is it that you feel they're being, in what way do you feel they're being undercompensated? That's where your mind has to shift. Doing something of positivity does not necessarily mean a pay increase. It will mean a cash bonus for sure. But is it true that just because they did that, they've been undercompensated? At what point then is appropriate compensation reached? You only have one control point in your St. Louis pay pool anyway, and that is for the GS14 non-supervisor equivalents. The NH4 non-supervisors have a control point. Nobody else does, meaning anybody else could go to the top of the broadband. But is that true? Is every position worthy of going to the top of the broadband? If I'm an NH4, for example, and I have director level people, and I have branch chief level people, and I have supervisor level people, should all of them go to the top of the broadband? Don't some of those jobs have higher level responsibilities than others? If that's true, then what's the max compensation for some of the positions? Your business rules say that the pay pool will determine that. And so that's our big point within the pay pool. And the sub pay pools don't get into money, but sub pay pools recommend scores, and scores lead to money. So you're involved in that certainly. But the main pay pool's difference is all about the award money. And so what is it that is appropriate levels of compensation? When I read an appraisal and you're in there within the meeting going, that sounds like their job. That should be then a delta 0. Remember, everybody's goal within AcqDemo is to get a delta 0. That means we paid them appropriately every paycheck all year long. If anybody gets a plus score, that means you underpaid them during the year. Our job is to pay them appropriately. So if they get a plus score, something happened that maybe they grew in skills, maybe they had higher level projects they're able to take on with those new skills. Maybe we did indeed undercompensate, but at some point they're being appropriately compensated for the work that they've done. And so that's our mind shift within the pay pool. Employees is to write and talk about things and focus on things all year long in a very different way. The pay pool's job, same thing. Focus about compensation management in an entirely different way. So that's what we want to talk through today. And I'll show a brief sample today. We'll do it all in the mock pay pool, of course, but I'll show a brief sample today where we can sort of take a quick practice at this. But that's our thing. It sounds kind of simple on paper, but again, when we get into dealing with real people, it's not going to be as easy. This is our challenge. Now, the first year, I have a slide coming up on this a little bit later to talk about, but while it's in my mind right now, this first year, I've yet to work with an organization that doesn't inherit a few problems from GS as far as pay setting goes. What we will find is in all directions off of the median. We're going to have some people who are paid a lot of money because they've been around for a very long time, but their skills stopped growing a while back. And now when we look at the AcqDemo scoring criteria, remember, everybody in AcqDemo in the world is scored on the same exact factor criteria, and we can't change that. We're not scoring objectives anymore. We're now scoring them against the factor criteria. When we look at that factor criteria, these people are not even close to doing that level work. Let's just say, for an example of somebody, they were at GS13 step 10. That's the top of the NH3. They have to be doing all 14 of the descriptors across the 3 factors, and they have to rank #1 against all of the people who are also at that same level. And again, there can be ties. It doesn't have to be just one person at #1, but they have to rank within the #1 slot of all NH3s in order to get a score of an 83, which is what relates to their current pay. When we look at them and we look at their write-ups and we know what they're doing during the year, they're not doing that. They're not even close to that. And if we actually scored them appropriately, they probably would be in the overcompensated range, which would mean we would have to place them on a contribution improvement plan and consider terminating them if they don't improve very quickly. Well, they can't improve very quickly. Their skills eroded years ago. They're not going to be able to go very quick to get up to that level. So then what do? That's going to be a scenario we're likely will run into. And we can talk about that later in this class when we get to it. We're going to see the other side of the house, similar. Somebody who's maybe somewhat newish and really just blowing things out of the water. Well, we brought them in wise for pay. When we look at the AcqDemo scoring criteria for what they should be, they are dramatically underpaid. We'd have to be talking about, 2, 3, maybe even 4-step jump in 1 year. Well, do we want to do that? If we give one person that kind of gigantic increase because they're in the same pay pool with other employees, we're taking money away from all the other employees, what they would be getting. Do we want to then maybe incrementally move them up, maybe move them up 1/3 of the way or half of the way or some part this year, and then sort of incrementally do it over the next couple of years till we make them whole? But what do we want to do with that? So we're going to have anomalies. We come to this compensation decision this first year and probably still into the second year because we won't be able to correct everything this first year. Then after that, once we're 2 years, 3 years into this, then all those should be gone. As long as we pay set appropriately for any new hires coming into the world, and we have sort of treat everybody with the AcqDemo scoring criteria, and we're all used to how this program works, we'll settle in. We won't have these giant, anomalies. But this first year and probably the second, we might have some. The second part I just mentioned, if we have an NH3 and they're supposed to reach 14 descriptors, remember you're only in for a brief part of this year. And so chances are people can't meet as many descriptors as they will next year when they have a full 12 months. So this first year, when we look at compensation and did we pay somebody appropriately, we're going to have to maybe take some things out of bounds from normal AcqDemo policy and procedure to this abbreviated cycle thought process. So as we get into this today, we'll want to talk about that as well. Any questions, comments, thoughts before we get moving in? Oops, sorry, hold on one second. All right, sorry, somebody at the door. All right, so this abbreviated cycle thing that we were just talking about here a moment ago. So normally we're a fiscal year program. You will be next year. You'll be in on 1 October. You'll go through 30 September. So we'll have a full year. We'll run the process exactly as we'll talk the way it should normally go. But this year, having come in again mid-year, we can't necessarily really do that. We're using the mock pay pool as the midpoint time frame. The next contribution plan should already be in place for what we expected somebody to do by the end of September. And we now are in the last 90 days of the cycle already. Army doesn't tend to like those things to be changed within the last 90 days. Legally in AcqDemo language, we can, but Army's policy usually is to not change them within the last 90 days in a normal year. And the thought behind that is that if we put an employee on a plan for 9 months, and maybe in the 11th month we shifted the focus, and there's no way in the world they can possibly get to that by the end of the year, we've disadvantaged the employee, kind of did a bait and switch sort of thing. And so they like to have them locked down in the last 90 days so the employee can focus strictly on meeting the goal of the plan. Now, again, we're not normally scoring the plan, but this year maybe we'll have to a little bit. I want to open that up for conversation here in just a minute. If we're only on an abbreviated period, and we want to say at the end of the appraisal period, did the employee contribute appropriately to what we expected, and did we pay them appropriately for the contributions that they made? If they can't meet the sort of normal 12-month number of descriptors, which is how we normally do AcqDemo pay pools, if we have to go, off course and say, all right, how will we do this? Let's have a little bit of a conversation around that. If we said that somebody is on a contribution plan, at the end of the cycle, they're going to write a self-assessment to say the value of the work that they did. What do you think you will consider as to whether or not that employee was paid appropriately for the work that they did? Let me open that up for conversation. What would you say? I'm going to go over to the chat area. Probably easiest way, if you'd like to chat in that answer, is just to raise your hand. And when I see your hand raised, I'll call on you by name to be the next one to speak. If they can't reach, which they most likely would not be able to reach all of the required descriptors they would over a 12-month period, because we're in an abbreviated period, how do you think we will determine that somebody did their work appropriately for what we expected and whether or not we paid them appropriately for that work? What would you say? I'd like to try a comment on that. And easiest to use the Teams raise a hand thing. I'll call on you when I see that. Troy Cosgrove. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think sometimes folks are doing, I don't want to say repetitive tasks, but they're doing very similar tasks on different projects, right? So they may be making those contributions in that way to fulfill, but maybe it comes down to, we wouldn't, give them a negative score, right? Like a -1 or whatever, but maybe we keep them neutral if they're not able to obtain all those tasks since they're, or all those objectives since we're in an abbreviated time frame.
Yeah, so there's a good point. Like if I met a descriptor, right, and because I did multiple projects during the year, let's say, for example, one of the descriptors says I'm to be a technical expert in something and people seek me out for advice and assistance, and I'll give advice and assistance. If I'm a technical expert in something, that might happen every single day. By the end of the year, I might have 300 examples of that. But I only need to prove a descriptor once, and then I've met the descriptor. It's an on-off switch. So I've met the descriptor. If I repeat that and give assistance over and over and over and over and over and over, and I just keep doing the same thing across multiple projects, I'm just doing the same thing. So multiple instances of the same thing don't necessarily move me up anywhere. That's my job, is to answer questions as they come in. And so we have to distinguish between doing something once, doing something multiple times as to whether or not that is award worthy or not. And if I'm just doing quote, quote, repetitive tasks and I don't move mission forward, that should be our distinguisher in that one, right? I can do repetitive tasks, but maybe I find a way to be more efficient with those tasks and we save time and money. So while I'm doing repetitive tasks, I have moved mission forward in a positive way. If I just repeat what's always been done and I'm just following the instructions and doing my job, that is probably, to your point, the definition of delta zero. And negative numbers, right? Negative numbers, I'm going to just bring a point about that, and then I'll ask for more comments on my initial question. Negative numbers to AcqDemo from the expected score going downwards, -1, -2, -3. I'm still within the rails. In Army's terms, as long as I'm within the rails, I do get a pay increase and I do get a cash bonus. But the more I go minus, the smaller that gets, but I still get something. Most organizations don't do that. In fact, no one but Army does that. to be the definition of most. Everyone else says if I get a -1, 2, 3 score, I might get a cash bonus, but I don't get a salary increase for sure. And even in a cash bonus, they make the distinction. Say, is the minus score there because somebody actually had performance-related issues? Then we probably don't even want to give a cash bonus. Or is it because they just didn't have the opportunity this year? The work that they were doing, maybe they finished some big giant project at the end of last year. They're starting something new right now. It's going to take a while to stand up before it really shows any value. When I compare the value of their work to mission this year to others, because they didn't really have opportunity, their rank may be rather on the lower end, and that may result in a minus score. In that case, they do give them a cash bonus, but they distinguish between if there's minus scores, is it a performance issue or is it an opportunity issue? Do we give a cash bonus or not? Army doesn't make that distinction. They give both a cash bonus and a salary increase, even in the minus land. But to add on to my previous question, then let's make this twofold. If somebody can't reach all the descriptors they're supposed to, how we determine their pay is appropriate or not. But then also, if we did give a minus score, is that sending a negative message about their performance? Or is it possible that it's just an opportunity issue? And how would we distinguish that within the pay pool? So let me make that a two-part question now, just to make it harder. How this year will we determine appropriate compensation when we're reading appraisals? And if we decide a negative score, how will we decide the message that goes back to the employee about that? Who has thoughts on that? You're a very boisterous group in person. You can answer online too. That's okay.
Could you repeat that question? Sorry.
So part A and part B. Part A would be the first one I asked before, which is that if somebody can't reach all of the descriptors they're required to meet based on their current pay, because we're an abbreviated session this year, appraisal session this year, what kind of leeway will we give? How will we determine that what they did was appropriate for their pay when we can't use the normal AcqDemo scoring 12-month criteria? How will we determine that somebody's been paid appropriately, underpaid, or overpaid this year in the abbreviated cycle? Part two, if we do decide to give any negative scores, what do you think that means to you, and what do you think that'll mean to an employee? Christopher, peace.
Yes, good morning. Yeah, Tom, you gave us a hard one. You gave us a thesis, like a college question on this one. Hey, I think it's really down to when you talk to the employee, even though it's abbreviated, you're going through this and their expectations of, hey, the opportunities are not there. I mean, we have that issue where you just don't have the opportunity. Hey, it was a slow month, or there weren't that many projects for that employee to participate in. So I don't think it would be a surprise once it comes to whether it's a performance. They know it's not a performance issue. Hey, like you said, the cash bonus, you're just not going to get a cash bonus, or it's proportional to what the work that you did do. So
yeah, great. Yep, great.
Yeah, like Wendell saying, it's like a prorate, like it's prorated, but again, the opportunity, because we have that situation come up every year. Hey, you just might have a slow year because, for instance, disaster response. Person sits on disaster response team, or debris. No hurricanes. I know this is an anomaly, or an extreme anomaly in the Corps of Engineers, but there was no hurricanes, no flood damage, and so there was no opportunity for that person to participate. You don't have a cash bonus. So I think it goes back to if you're having that discussion with the employee, they should know that. And yes, you're going to get paid with your commensurate with your cost of living increases, etc. But that part will be missing, and they should know that it's not a performance issue. I don't know if that helped.
Yeah, that helps. Let me just clarify though. Remember, in an Army, as long as we don't have to put them on adverse action, they're still going to get a salary increase and still get a cash bonus, but it'll be the prorated smaller one. So they're still going to get something in Army's rules. Again, other organizations don't do that, but Army does. So that's sort of a nice message you have to send always, that if there is a non-performance opportunity situation that says, you know, your amount was prorated to a smaller amount because of lack of opportunity, and that again was discussed with the employee during the year, they should know that they're still getting something. Again, a lot of other organizations, they might not, but here they still are. So that's a good part. But then what I would expect to see in that case in the supervisor's appraisal is to give the pay pool that clue, to say the score that I'm recommending to you is based on lack of opportunity this year in these particular ways, so that you know that it's not a performance issue. We don't have to think about adverse action, and you feel comfortable, you know, adjudicating and awarding maybe some of those lower scores. But you know, the question from the pay pool always is that supervisors are going to recommend a number. How do you know that number is valid? That's got to be justified by what they wrote to you so that you know. Great. All right. Anybody else like to chime in on our thesis questions? If not, I'll jump back over to slides and move us forward a little more, and we'll break this down as we go some more. All right. Back over here. Let me just be sure we're in our timelines. To reiterate what Don said. So our cycle ends at the end of September. Right. So somebody has to be in the program for 90 days or more to be part of this first cycle. So that date came and went last week. So if you don't have somebody on board now, which you hire between now and September, end of September, they will not be part of this year's pay pool. This is sort of a joke, sort of not. These are your new favorite humans. If they are on board on 30 September, a percentage of their salary goes into the pay pool funds. But because they weren't here for 90 days, they're not eligible to be considered for any of that money. But the rest of you and the rest of your employees are. So that's a good thing for you, not so good for them, right? They're going to have to wait a whole nother year before they're part of the pay pool. So if you bring any onboarding in from new people, at least if they're moving laterally from GS, they keep their same salary with their Wiggy buy-in. But if you're hiring anybody off the street new and you can do pay setting, you're going to want to consider that. They're not going to be eligible for the pay pool this year. They'll have to wait till next year, 15 months from this point, before they'd be in the process. All right, but then our cycle will end at the end of September. Employees will do their self-assessments the end of September, first week or two of October. Don, I'm sure we'll set the dates and get that out for everyone, followed by the supervisor's appraisal. Those will be due no later probably than the end of October. As Don said, right now, it looks like pay pools there might meet the week of 11 November. You have to have time to read all those appraisals before the meeting starts. All right, so you're gonna need at least a week or two between supervisors' assessments being submitted and finalized and pay pool meeting. Your homework in between will be to read everything and come to those meetings prepared. Then you'll have quite a bit of time for the pay pools. We don't finalize at the AcqDemo program office everything till, depends when the payout happens in January, but somewhere around mid to late December. We pay out in the first full pay period of January. This year that turned out to be mid-January. The first pay period of January included the date of 31 December last year, so it wasn't a full January payout. So we had to wait to the second period of January before any payouts happened. But the first full January pay period will be when AcqDemo payouts happen, and we'll backdate that accordingly into December when all pay pool data will have to be finalized. At Army, once your pay pools are done, it still goes to the Army AcqDemo office. And from the Army AcqDemo office, it comes up to us at the AcqDemo program office itself. So there's 2 more reviews after you all are done before everything gets finalized and approved for distribution out to the employees. All right, so our process will be sort of that. Let's fill in a gap or two here. So employee self-assessment, supervisor appraisals. Then that's where the pay pool administrator takes over for you as the next task. Each sub-pay pool and pay pool will have a pay pool administrator, and they will be responsible for getting all of that data downloaded out of Castanet and then out to you with time to read. Whether that's electronic or paper format is entirely up to how the pay pool wants to operate. AcqDemo Program Office doesn't have any policy on that one way or the other. Whatever people prefer can be done. We'll all sign non-disclosure agreements as pay pool panel members to say that, of course, all of this information is private and we can't share it with anyone outside of the pay pool meetings. So the administrator will do that. As I mentioned, there was a spreadsheet for the sub-pay pool and a different spreadsheet for the main pay pool. The pay pool administrators will also populate that before the meeting starts so that they can do their thing, so that you can do your thing within the pay pool. The sub-pay pool spreadsheet has 4 columns and the main pay pool spreadsheet has 8 columns that are called wildcard columns. The spreadsheet knows how to divvy up so you can sort of look at things in multiple ways. If you want to, for example, take a look at how the NH4s compared to the NH3s compared to any other classifications, it knows how to do that. If you want to compare occupational series, how does an engineer compare to an office staff person as far as scores are going? It can do that. If you want to compare by supervisor, it can do that. When we get up to the main pay pool for your St. Louis one that has sub-pay pools, if you want to compare how the sub-pay pools do to see if we're being consistent and fair, it knows how to do that. But there's other things that it doesn't know how to do that we might want to ask it to do. And that's what the wildcard columns are for. If when we look at the spreadsheet, we say, you know what, in the pay pool, it'd really be nice if we could look at the data this way. That's something that the pay pool managers and sub-managers should talk to the pay pool administrators with before the meeting happens, so that the administrators can populate those wildcard columns with the appropriate data, so that during the meetings that can be looked at. So that happens in this gap period between assessments are handed in before any pay pools meet. Then if we do for the pay pool that does have sub-pay pools, that would be the next activity. In this case, there's 9 of them. So 9 sub-pay pools all meeting at approximately the same time to do their thing. And we'll talk about what their thing is coming up. But then there's probably going to be some changes, especially this first year. What gets recommended to you is going to be all over the map. Some supervisors are going to be giant Santa Clauses. They're going to recommend things like +9 and +10, not really knowing what that means. The average Army score last year was +1.4 from somebody's expected score. Normally right now around a +2 equates to a GS step increase, but it could be different within the more variations we give from Delta 0, that could change. But in a sort of established pay pool, around a +2 would be equivalent to a step increase. So if we see things like +10, we're talking about 5 step increases within a 12-month period, or in this case, in 1 quarter of our time. Would that make any sense? Probably not. Not unless we had something, extraordinarily odd happen. But I will guarantee this first year, because everybody's new and learning, there's going to be some scores that simply don't make any sense. And you'll probably want to change those within your sub-pay pool meeting. That means that the pay pool administrator has to get that data back into Castanet with your changes and then redistribute all of the forms out to the pay pool panel members with your updated information. And then the pay pool panel can meet. And at some point after that, once it goes all the way up through the various offices and we get into January, then the pay adjustments will happen and the supervisors can give out the data to the employees. So let me ask this. This is a big fear of employees and supervisors of you, the pay pool panel. They assume that you are all evil relatives of Darth Vader and are going to ruin their lives. So question 1 will be, what would be your response to that? Let me just ask that one first. If they're just nervous about change and a new process, and now we can't look 30 years down the road and know how many step increases are coming our way. Every single year you meet in a room and sign a non-disclosure that you won't tell anybody anything. What would your message be though, when you're all done with your pay pool, to make employees feel that you did a good job and you took care of the people and you did things appropriately and considered all things to act, morally? what would you say your message to the employees are who have concerns about a pay pool meeting? The first thing you're going to say is, you're not my supervisor. You don't even know me. How can you possibly adjudicate my score? What would be your answer to just that first question? If an employee is far enough away in position from you, the pay pool panel member, and you don't supervise them on a day-to-day basis, but yet you're going to determine their score and their payout in the pay pool, how can you do that? Let me ask that question. Who wants to try to tackle that one? If an employee has a fear of your knowledge of their work and doesn't think you can do your job in the pay pool panel because of that, what would your answer be?
I think it has more to do with the fact that the business portion of it, I guess, that the write-up that the employee did and the commentary as additional information that the supervisor provided is the most crucial part of it, not necessarily just the pay pool making the decision. I think like they have to understand that it's the supervisor's input and they're obviously knowledgeable about the employee's work. That's should be the greatest weight in the process, I think.
Yeah, totally agree. And so in our employee self-assessment training, we always say you're writing the main document yourself. The supervisor is just supplementing on top of what you wrote, anything that they would want to add on that maybe you did that you missed, or that they would want to, clarify more to support the scores that they're going to recommend. But the main appraisal is the employees. And we'll say to the employees that who cares the most about whether or not you get a pay increase, you or someone else? They'll say me. I said, great, because that's how the program works. You write the main document for consideration yourself. But that means you've got to capture that. You've got to capture what you feel is most important that the pay pool knows. And again, then now the burden becomes on writing, and then they get nervous about writing. And then they get nervous about the fact that you're going to adjudicate something in this dark hole. And so it's change management. So we want to, all the way through the pay pool process, really probably over communicate the process and over communicate how you're going to do the right things and why that you are good people and not Darth Vader's relatives, and you are concerned about motivating your work staff to do even better in the next year. We're not trying to have everybody fired. We're trying to motivate them to even do more if they can, and we're doing that with financial rewards. And so we want to do the right thing within the meeting. All right, so that. Sorry, the other question that I wanted to ask then. So if you were to consider changing the supervisor score, whether this is in the sub pay pool or the main pay pool, I said I can guarantee that this year you are going to change some of the supervisor's recommendations. Everybody's new at this. And so it's not going to be 100% right. Probably in no year will it ever be 100% right, but this year will probably be the most off from what you might be expecting. And so if we're going to consider changing a supervisor's recommended score, what should we within a sub pay pool or pay pool do before we just make the change? I want to crack at that one. If we're going to consider changing the supervisor's recommended scores for an employee, before we just make the change, what should we do?
Bring that supervisor in to discuss it.
Yeah, it's part of their responsibility is to be available during the pay pool meetings. And so that has to be made known to them so that if there are any questions, they know. I have one organization, don't need to name them, but every single year, that's their business rule. And says that before we change any scores, we're absolutely going to 100%, without doubt, contact the supervisor. And what we're saying to the supervisor at that point is that what we're seeing written on the page and what we're seeing in your recommended scores, we're not seeing how those go together. So your request for them is going to be one of two things. Maybe they can just give you information. You can say, oh, I didn't interpret that on the page that way. Okay, we're good here. But more likely, what we're going to need to have happen is that either the supervisor is going to have to go alter their appraisal to better support the scores if you want to approve the scores, or you're going to have to change the scores to be more in line with the appraisal. But when you're calling in the supervisor, what you're saying is these two things don't go together. Before the supervisor hands them back to the employee, they need to go together. And right now they don't. What happens at this particular other organization, the employees complain every year, rather loudly, that the supervisor doesn't give them any information about how the scores were achieved and how they ever got to those particular scores. And the supervisor says, well, the pay pool did it. And that's just not true if we do what we just said. Supervisor recommended something to you. If you approve it, the supervisor knows exactly why those scores were granted because they approved them. If you changed them, it's because you had a dialogue with the supervisor to explain why they were changing. So there should be no cases where the supervisor can't explain the scores to a certain point. I'll come up with one point later where they can't 100% explain, but they can get a very good message across in the one point where they can't 100% explain. But there should be no cases where they say, I don't know how these scores happened at all. That's not what I recommended. The pay pool did it. That conversation should never happen. In the real world, it does. And you want to get at that supervisor and sort of give them some warning not to do that again should that occur. So policy should be, if we're going to consider changing any scores along this process, supervisors pulled in to have dialogue and conversation before you make your decisions. All right, so that gets us to the responsibilities of the supervisors themselves. They are going to recommend, and recommend being the key term, just preliminary scores to give the employee a starting position within the rank ordering. For years and years and years, AcqDemo started in 1999, probably till around 2000, till 2012 maybe, supervisors did not recommend scores. It didn't happen. They submitted the written documents and the pay pool started doing their rank order process. And both pay pools and supervisors eventually said, we need to speed up this process. It's taking too long. So couldn't we give the employee some sort of starting position from the pay pool perspective? Just give us a starting position for rank order and we can work from that instead of having to start from scratch. And supervisors saying, I would like to have more say in the scores that I think my employee should get. I supervise them all year. And so with that was the addition of supervisors being allowed to recommend scores. Now, some employees have the wrong opinion that supervisor approves the scores. And they also, again, get rather chastised and upset in some cases when they feel the pay pool overrides the supervisor. But what I say to them, I say, let's just say that I supervise 5 of these people. Let's say I'm in the St. Louis pay pool. There's one pay pool, let's just say for sake of number, doesn't matter, 200 people. But across those 200 people, there's 9 sub-pay pools. I don't know everybody. I supervise 5 of the 200 people. How am I supposed to decide my 5 people's final rank order position? I can't possibly know that as a supervisor. So I have to understand the only thing I'm doing is giving an opinion as to whether or not my employee was paid appropriately. If I'm plussing them up, I'm saying, oh gosh, I underpaid them this year and we can't ever make that up to them, but let's pay them more appropriately next year. If I put them at Delta 0, we're saying, hey, perfect. They did exactly what we expected to do. We paid them appropriately for doing that. Spot on. That's great. And if we give them minus scores, then we're back to that. Is that an opportunity issue? Is that a performance issue? What's going on with that? But they're recommending the scores to you for positioning based on that thought process. And as we said in the final blue bullet, second one from the bottom, then they need to know when the pay pool that their employees are involved in are happening so that they can be available that whole day to participate if called upon. And then from there may be some cases, though, where they don't actually do an appraisal of the employee. And we call those things in AcqDemo presumptive ratings. That the first one is that they have to, that one we talked about, they have to be in AcqDemo for 90 days or more. Their employee can't be in the appraisal. That's presumptive rating number 1. That means they're not here long enough to be part of the process. They'll get the government-wide pay increase, the thing that used to be called COLA, that's now GPI in January if there is one, but they don't get anything else from the pay pool this year. They're not eligible. If they are away from their duty station for a large period of the appraisal period, and this year you might have some of these people that as you converted into AcqDemo, they are on active duty or they are on sick leave or they're just not here. We don't have any data to appraise. There are 5 different presumptive status ratings. If any of those come into play, then the supervisor tells the pay pool administrator that The payable administrator goes and codes in Castanet that employee's record, and then that record will be grayed out in your payable spreadsheet. You won't have an appraisal, obviously, because nothing will be written, and you'll be noting that in the spreadsheet, so the record will be grayed out. There'll be nothing for you to do. And so in this, in the supervisor class, we talked about these briefly, but they're just repeated here, so you have them again in payable perspective. 5 statuses, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Each one with slightly different meanings. Again, too new to be adjudicated, sick leave, military leave. Each one has a different status as to what they'll be considered for. The rule will generally be, except for presumptive status 1, where they don't get a rating, everyone else will get their expected score as their final rating. In future years, they usually get their expected score or last year's score, whichever one is better for them, will be the general thought around this, so that they do become eligible for awards based on your business rules. Excuse me. Based on their particular statuses, but no appraisals, nothing the payable has to do. This is now your second favorite group of people. The first ones are people who were hired in the last 90 days. They put money into the payable but can't take any out. Your others are those that are gone so long that they can't even be appraised, so you don't have to do anything. So now you got 2 groups of people that might have sort of not been your favorite in the past. They have higher standing now for you. All right, then payable administrators. I don't know if anybody, and Don's doing a lot of this, but for other ones, if anybody's on the call, they are the people who sort of facilitate the entire process. Each time a deliverable is coming up, the employee self-assessment, the supervisor appraisal, the pay pool meetings, they'll be the ones making sure that all of the milestones are met. Now, of course, no employee will ever have been late on their self-assessment, and no supervisor will ever be late on their appraisal. But should they be getting close to late, the administrators will keep putting out nudge to get that in. As supervisors, you can see that within Castanet yourself. You have a dashboard, and you can see which of your employees have done it and finished it, those that have started it but not finished, and those that haven't even started yet at any given moment. You can see that within Castanet yourself. They do now need to maintain the Castanet database. We, from the AcqDemo program office, aren't allowed to have live connection to the DoD databases as a demo program. Seems a little bit silly in these years, especially 25 years in, but it is what it is. So we downloaded all the data once, and from that once, it's now manually maintained by the payable administrators. So as if employee salaries change, if employees change positions and report to a different supervisor, if they leave the program, if they get hired into the program, they're manually going and keeping that database current. It does connect to other databases just for the sake of comparing data, and gives them reports if it feels that the Castanet database is out of sync with maybe something like DCPDS. That it will do. It just won't fix anything by itself. They have to manually do that. One of the jobs from your internal processing will be within the pay pool, what is it that we want them to do? And pay pool managers will decide this, and sub pay pool managers will decide this. Do we want them to actually facilitate the pay pool meeting themselves? Or do we want them to be more, as the manager, I will facilitate the meeting myself, or we'll bring in an outside consultant to facilitate the meeting for us because we're so new, we don't know what to do yet. What is it that this person should do within this meeting? And then decide that, so we're all on the page of how that meeting's going to run. And then afterwards, we have a reporting tool. We're required to give the workforce some aggregate data on our pay pool results. What was the average score? What was the average payout? Any other way that we want to distribute the information. Army does it Army-wide, but we'll want to do it pay pool wide ourselves individually. And so they can use that analysis tool called the PAT tool, reporting tool, to do that and get the reports out that you want to see get out to the workforce. They will, as I said earlier, prepare all of what I'm in here we're calling the pay pool books, the appraisals. Are you getting them electronically, or are you getting them on paper format? They'll prepare the spreadsheets we're going to use within the spreadsheet. They will capture any changes within the spreadsheet, and we'll code that spreadsheet saying we moved the score up, we moved the score down. They'll take notes as to why we did that. If you want to put a timeline on employees' adjudication, some pay pools will say, We have 5 minutes per person, 10 minutes per person. Without that, we may stay on somebody for half hour, an hour, and just argue over and over and never get anywhere. Pay pool manager may decide to put a time limit per person. If it's not decided as a unanimous decision by the pool at that point, either we'll come back to it or the pay pool manager will decide. Since they are the only person who has legal authority to approve the scores anyway, they have final decision authority. They will also, the bottom part of slide 15, want to keep track of any lessons learned. Chances are this first cycle, and maybe even every single year, as we go through this, we're going to say, gosh, we thought we had like the perfect business rules, but we learned this during the pay pool this year. And because of that, we might want to change the business rules in this way. Or again, say, hey, this business rule worked really great, whatever it is. They want to keep notes throughout. Again, on score changes, on justifications for anything, but really on lessons learned. How can we do this different and better going forward? If we need to make business rule changes, what rules? Because there's going to be a lot of dialogue. Especially in the pay pool, if I had 200 people in there and we're rank ordering 200 people, there's going to be a lot of dialogue. We're not going to remember everything that's said. They are the note taker to keep track of everything that happens. And then pay pool, one last thing before we take our first break this morning. Again, your job then is to get these things right. Be sure that we are making our decisions from an equity and consistent basis. If we applied a rule, whether it's in our business rule or it's just something that we came up with on our own, the most common one I'll say is that, what does this particular factor descriptor mean? If it says somebody has to be the functional or technical expert to get credit for this, what does that mean? And then once we apply that to one person says, yes, that's the definition we're going to use for that. This first year, because all this language is new to us, we're going to have to come up with some definitions. If it says something, somebody has to do something that is new and innovative. New to whom? New to them, new to their division, new to their branch, new to their Army Corps of Engineers, new to the world. What is new? What does innovative mean? If it has to be precedent setting, one of the factors talks about that. What does that mean? Whatever we decide within the pay pool as to what those terms mean, we need to apply that consistently across the board to everyone. Right. So just at the end of the day, you feel really morally good that everything we did was the right thing to do. And we said, if anything you feel is poorly documented and doesn't support the scores, contact the rating official to be sure we get the right thing. And then for this rank ordering thing, that's going to be the hardest, right? How are we going to compare? Let's just say that in the St. Louis pay pool, while we have 9 sub-pay pools, you're all going to roll up into one pay pool at the end of the day. So how am I going to compare people from one branch or a division to another? How am I going to compare an engineer to a finance person, to an HR person, to anybody else? How am I going to say that, again, at the end of the day, we did the right thing? We have a good amount of money to give out this year. And we talked in our previous training, first year organizations get to give out more than existing organizations because of the sort of extra burden of converting and learning all of this. There's more money available. That would be cool if that was over a 12-month period, but it's a little crazy to me that it's over just like a 3 or 4 month period. You have a full 12 months worth of award dollars to give out and more award dollars this first year than you're going to have next year. So in this first year for 3 months plus of work, you're going to have more money to give out than you're going to have for 12 months worth of work next year. That's where we can really make some big changes if we do get in and we find we have some of those discrepancies. Somebody's way underpaid compared to what they're doing. We can make some big leaps this year that we can't really probably make in future years to make that more appropriate going forward. This is a chance to really make some course corrections. And I guarantee every time we get payouts from GS, there are all kinds of crazy situations that the pay somebody's getting doesn't make any sense for the work that they're doing. And so we'll have some good opportunity this year to really think about how we want to distribute this money within the pay pool. All right, that takes us through our review of ground rules kind of thought processes. What comments, thoughts do you have? Chris, I see your hand up.
Yes, so I just want to make sure I heard right. So we have, like you have an admin support assistant. They're going to be compared or rank ordered with 1102s, 1105s, or other jobs series. Is that what I'm hearing? Especially if say if they only had one admin support assistant in the whole pay pool, what does that look like? And then my second question was related, stepping back to the employees. What was the no for what we can't discuss with employees? Like, hey, I can't say that. Well, that's what the pay pool decided. I was a champion for you on this score, but this is what happened once it was deliberated in the pay pool. What part, or if at all, are they involved in the any discussions with the payouts, the employees, speaking specifically about employee? What can we tell them or not?
All right, so part one, which was, what if will an admin assistant be in the same pay pool as engineers, et cetera? Yes. And St. Louis has one pay pool, and your other area, the St. Paul area thing, has one pay pool, right? So everybody within the pay pool is compared to everybody else in the pay pool. But let's say I have an admin assistant in there, whatever that is. Let's say they're an NK3. And with that, their pay is, you know, whatever that equates to. They're going to be ranked, ordered with the other people around their similar pay grouping. So, as I said, we're going to take the NH4s. Those are the equivalent of, if we had anybody at NH4 high, that would be the equivalent of GS15-7 through GS15 step 10. They're going to be rank ordered among themselves. The admin assistants never going to be in that same pay range. They're not going to be rank ordered with those people. The next grouping are the 4 mediums. That's equivalent of GS14 step 5 to GS15 step 6. Again, the administrative assistants never going to be up in that pay group. They're not going to be considered with those same people. They're going to be considered with people around their same pay grade. So for an NK person, let me just get the right.
Yeah, it's NK.
So they are anywhere from GS1 to GS10. So let's say you have an NK3, that's GS8 through GS10. That's equivalent to close to the upper range, middle to upper ranges of our NH2s. Those are the people they're going to be compared with. Because NH2s are anywhere from GS5 to GS11. If I have an NK3, that's GS8 through GS10. If I have an NK2, that's GS5 through GS7. So you might not have a whole lot of NH2s either, right? Unless you've got some developmental positions. Most of your people are probably NH3s, NH4s. But if you have some NH2s, that's who your NKs are going to be compared with. Because it's by dollar amount. We don't care so much about the position. We care, are we paying them appropriately to get there? We compare the value of their work compared to the value of other people's work who are paid around the same dollar amount as they are. But that's a good thing to communicate out to employees. If I'm an admin person and I say this is a rank order system, we're all one pay pool, I have a fear of that. Going, I can't compare with the branch chiefs. I don't have that kind of job. I'm in the same pay pool with them. I'll be ranked with them. No, you're not. You'll be ranked with the people who are paid around the same level you are. If it turns out we only have one person in that whole category, there isn't anybody else, then the only thing we can do is look at them as a case-by-case individual basis and say, okay, here's what we paid them. Here's what we did. Did we pay them appropriately or not? And just look at them as a one-off to decide that same thing. Since we can't run our usual rank process, we have to take it as an offline one-on-one situation. But the final answer is still, did we pay them appropriately or not? Do we need to increase their pay, or are we good where we are? Part 2, where what can't we say? So from a supervisor should never ever say, I recommended X, but pay pool overrode me and approved Y. Never, ever, ever. Their job when they do their appraisal meeting to the employee is to explain why the score that they got is the appropriate score. Yeah, sort of as I said before, if I've supervised 5 people out of 200, I can't possibly know where my 5 people are going to rank at the end of the day. So my recommended score is not valid. So it's just never a positive conversation to say, hey, I ranked you much higher, but the pay pool knocked you down. They didn't think you were nearly as good as I did. Or conversely, hey, I honestly didn't think you were all that great. They actually moved you up. That's just neither of those are good conversations. They should never, ever happen. Their only task is to explain why the scores that were approved. But I mentioned once in your second point of your question is, then what is it that we can't necessarily 100% tell the employees? It's what I've moved forward on the slide deck right now, slide 30, is the rank order thing. You will see in the pay pool, let's say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 names on this slide. They all got 3 high. And so we have to give out, and this is NH for job achievement, we have to give out between 79 and 83 points. So we're going to have to look at the discriminators for job achievement factor. Those are things like employee development and mentoring and creative problem solving and complexity and difficulty of the work that somebody did and the leadership that they showed and the accountability that they showed. The discriminators that are locked in stone with that factor. We'd say, okay, of these 8 people, are they all equal? Should all 8 people get 83 points? Or as we look at these 8 people, do we see, using the rank order criteria that we have, which are the factor discriminators, do we see some value differences in the contributions they made this year? In this sample, we see that they decided John and Dan tied at number 1 and got 83 points, Susan alone at 82 points, Bruce and Rick 81, etc. So let's just say, for example, I'm Rick. And so I'm having my appraisal meeting with my supervisor. You see this rank order list. This is what the rest of the employees and the supervisors can't see. When you sign a non-disclosure agreement, you are saying that how we got to this answer is not something we will discuss outside of the pay pool room. Because we are federally not allowed, if I'm Rick, you're not allowed to show me other employees' scores and payouts and appraisals. And you're not allowed to show my appraisal with other employees. That is only for me, my supervisor, and you, the pay pool, to see federally, federal law. No one else can see that. And if I give it to somebody, that's my choice, but you can't give it to somebody. So I as Rick, I can't see this rank order list. And my supervisor, even if they're on the pay pool, can't show me this rank order list. So if I'm Rick and I say, well, I got 81, I know that 3 high goes up to 83. Why didn't I get 82 or 83? Technically, in order to do that, I would have to show him Susan's appraisal and say, here's where her contributions were deemed to be a little bit more valuable than yours. And then show him John and Dan's appraisals and say, here's where their appraisals are deemed to be more valuable. Can't do that. What I could say to Rick, though, is, hey, you got 81. That means that A, you got 3 high. It was deemed that you met every single descriptor. If you're interested in future years or trying to reach your 82 or 83, here are areas where I think you could still continue to grow. If you're interested in reaching the top of that particular pay band, maybe there's other type of work that we could look for down the road that you could be assigned. So you do have an opportunity to get up to those higher level scores. But based on what you did this year, this is where you ranked amongst everyone else who got 3 high. That's the most we can say to Rick. That's frustrating to the supervisor. That's frustrating to the employee. They want to know exactly why they got the number that they got. That's the one thing we cannot fully explain. That is protected by federal law. We're not allowed to break the law. Supervisors are going to do it. Some supervisor, I guarantee, is going to say, hey, I gave you this score, but the pay pool knocked you down. I don't know why. But they're not supposed to do that. They're only supposed to say you got 3 high. That meant you got all the descriptors covered and you got approved for that. And amongst the other people who got 3 high, you ranked in the 81 position. If they don't ask anything, that's all we have to say. If they ask, how do I get higher in future years? Technically, we can't even answer that, right? Because this is a rank order thing specific to each year. Maybe John and Dan this year worked on a really high level project and that's all done now. And so next year, if they do good quality work, but they don't have that high level project anymore, they might be at 80 next year. Doesn't mean they did anything worse. It just means the opportunity of value wasn't there. Rick's 81 might be worth 82 next year, even if he doesn't change. From year to year to year, there's no way to guarantee any score. We can only say do the best that you can do, show that you improve the mission every single year, and we'll see amongst your peer group where that ranks in any given year. That's the discomfort for people, but that's the way this thing works. John, I see hand raised.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Back to what you said about as a supervisor, I wouldn't say what you said, you know, I rated you this and they bumped you down. Our only job, you said, was to explain how the score that the panel came up with, the pool came up with, is the right one for that person. What if we don't agree with that? What if we can't explain that? What if we don't really have much of an indication as to why they got what they did and we don't agree with it? Then what's the recommended action? Or do we just speak with the pay pool manager to, or at least like our branch chief representative to the pay pool? What would be the best approach?
Yeah, so what we talked about a little bit before, so let's say that for Rick, I recommended 83 and it got approved at 81. So remember, your proposed, what we proposed earlier is your business rule says that if I'm in the pay pool and I'm thinking of overriding you as the supervisor's recommended score, I've got to call you into the pay pool meeting and say, you recommended 83, we're not seeing that. What's written down here on the page and that score don't go together. And so help us. If you supervise this person all year, help us understand your rationale behind that. And if we feel like, you know, they've got a really solid argument, what we're going to say to the supervisor then is, hey, go beef up your appraisal to what you just said here, because that's not on the page, and then we'll approve the 83. Or conversely, what we're going to say in that meeting is going, yeah, that just does not equate to an 83 in fairness and consistency with what we're seeing from everyone else. We're gonna have to knock that score down. And so you're having that meeting with them in the pay pool. And so again, you may not agree, but you will know the rationale behind the decision making. Now, if you don't agree, that's, you know, again, technically, we're not supposed to go back to the employee and say, I recommended 83, they knocked it down to 81. I don't agree with that. That's you know, that's a no-no. The employee has the opportunity to grieve the score. If they got an 81 and they go, you know, I really think that I did as much as anybody else here, I should have got 83, then they have the chance to go ask for reconsideration. But if we tell them, hey, you know, they knocked you down and I don't agree, at the same time, then basically you're saying, here's the paperwork to fill out to file your grievance, because that's just not right. And that's not our job. Our job is not to overrule our senior leaders and throw them under the bus at this time of year. Our job is just to explain to the employee why they got the score that they got. And the employee then can do what they want. Accept that or not is up to them. So says the program. Again, in real world, that's maybe a little more difficult to take in than what the book says, but that's the book answer at least.
Okay, thanks. I gather that if I'm explaining a particular rating a particular employee got by the pay pool, they can probably sense whether or not, even if I don't say it, they can probably sense whether I'm in total agreement with the panel or not. I think. I mean, they know that I know what they do, and if I value what they do, and if I'm explaining that this is what the pay pool panel said, and I'm not specifically saying that I would have gone higher. I mean, they may infer that anyway. I think. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. There's real world versus book too, also, right? If I'm giving this information, I'm really uncomfortable giving it. I think it's just wrong. They're gonna, and they know you well. They're gonna catch on. But again, I said, if I supervise 5 out of 200, what I'm recommending doesn't really have any rationale behind it, which is why AcqDemo was designed saying supervisors don't recommend scores. They can't possibly know where the 5 people are going to rank order across 200. So to ask somebody to recommend a score is kind of goofy in one way. It was actually cleaner when supervisors didn't do it. It just took pay pools longer, and they didn't like that. All right, who else has questions, comments, anything we've covered thus far?
Tom, we had one comment come in early on. Said, will you show us in Castanet how this works? I don't see how the assessments work in Castanet for the supervisors.
Oddly, I don't currently have access to Castanet, so I cannot show you, but the way it works within the system is within Castanet, when the employee logs into Castanet, they have a module for self-assessments. So they will go in and type in their self-assessment there. They have to write to each factor individually. That will then, when they're all done, they will hit a submit to supervisor button. That will notify you that their self-assessment is all done. And then you will go in and do your supervisor appraisal. When you're all done, you will save yours. And when the time period is all done, the payable administrator will pull those things out of Castanet into the paper or electronic paper form or paper form to give off to the pay pool panel members. As a supervisor, I said, you'll have a dashboard and you'll be able to see one of three statuses. Your employee hasn't started at all. They've started but not finished. They haven't given it to you yet, or they are all done and they forward it to you to move on from there. So you'll see that as your opening supervisor dashboard screen, but then when you go into your employee's name, you'll be able to see their self-assessment. And then right below their self-assessment will be your box to write your supplemental appraisal, adding on to whatever it is that they said that you want to add on. Good question. Other questions? So our next part is to talk about the scoring criteria and doing the actual scoring. That which we've been talking about earlier, but now really the main paper job. The documents will have been submitted to you. Now, what do you do with them? So first off, we just have to get in our minds the separation of contribution versus performance, that which we talked about a little bit earlier. We have to adjudicate them within the pay pool separately. The contribution scores lead to the payouts. The performance score, which we wish we didn't have to do, but we do, is also part of this. That's called the pay pool score. So let's just take a look at these two things, the blue boxes and the orange boxes. AcqDemo, let's start with the orange boxes because they're the easiest ones to talk about. That's the 1, 3, 5 scoring thing, just like you had in DPMAP. It is for performance scoring. The only reason we're doing this is beginning in 2017, federal law changed around if there ever is a reduction in force, what's the criteria for that? It used to just be how long somebody was employed and whether or not they had veterans preference, but that changed to the primary criteria is the how well the person is performing their job. As I mentioned, really at the start of class, we never scored how well performed their job, if they were performing their job, and called it a day. Well, now we had to adjudicate that. So you will also have to score everybody on the 1, 3, 5 performance score for each factor, just like we did in DPMAP for the objectives over there. So the supervisor will have to recommend one of those things to you, and you will have to approve them. We have to sort of get in our mind with that as to what would make a 1 versus a 3 versus a 5. A 1 will be easy and rare. Thankfully, that would mean somebody's doing a horrifically bad job and you are considering terminating them. That's not going to happen very often, but a 3 to a 5 thing. If it's been historically true that everyone has gotten a 5 and we call it a day, you can do that, but then that negates the entire reason we're doing this, because the law change says if we had to downsize, who are we keeping and who's going? We'd be back to the old way, which is the longest tenured employees stay and the newest people are out the door. The law says we have to base it on performance. So we have to make a distinction between 5s and 3s. Since this was implemented in 2017, it had been around 60% of the people got 5s and around 40% got 3s. It's sort of been sliding up the last year or two. So in your mind, let me just open this up for questions. I'm going to go back over the chat so I can see any hand raiser here. In your mind, are people going to be expecting 5s because that's what you've always done? And if they got a 3, that's going to be a shock. Let me just start with that question. Do we think everybody's going to be expecting to get a 5? And if you got a 3, that really is going to be perceived negatively? Do you believe that might be the case? Yes or no?
It shouldn't be the case. We've tried to normalize that 3s are quality employees that are doing their job.
Okay, so we've tried to normalize that already historically, and so there should be used to getting some 3s now already. Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, great. unusual for us. So that's wonderful. Then there won't be as big a shock for everyone else. Then within your pay pools, the definition of these, which we'll come to a little bit later, is a 5 is somebody who substantially and consistently surpasses the scoring criteria. We'll take a look at what that means coming up. And somebody who gets a 3 is somebody who meets and sometimes exceeds the scoring criteria. So we're gonna have to go to what would substantially and consistently mean. How would we support a 5? If supervisors are to write about that in their appraisal and recommend a score, what is it that you're looking for? And so if we already had those conversations, fantastic, you're ahead of 99% of other organizations then. Then the biggest one that AcqDemo cares about, and the only one that AcqDemo had from 1999 to 2017, are the blue boxes, which are these pay pool payouts, which are threefold. One is the government-wide pay increase if they offer something in January. Your business rules are that everybody's going to get that no matter what score they get. So that's a relief for them there. What if Congress awards something, president signs off on something, they're going to get it. Then the other one is another pay increase opportunity, which would be similar to the old step increase kind of money. And then the other one is the one-time cash awards to be given out. And that's what the categorical and numerical scores and rank ordering, all that stuff is all about that. And so as I mentioned, again, really early on in today, we've got to separate these two things out in our minds. We're not adjudicating whether somebody is doing their job appropriately or not in order to do the pay pool money payout. We're only talking about that for the sake of their ranking, if ever there was a reduction in force, the 135 score. So employees know the 135 thing, and they sometimes get fixated on that. And again, AcqDemo doesn't really care about that score unless there's a reduction in force. Then it's very important. Otherwise, we're really focused on the categorical and numerical scores. That leads us to our pay pool payout award opportunities. So we're adjudicating both, unfortunately, in different ways. So for the sake of that, we get scores for each of the 3 factors, as we've talked, both categorical score, numerical score, and pay pool score. So we're going to get something like a 3 high categorical score, an 81 numerical score, and a 3 pay pool score for factor 1. Then we're going to get something else for factor 2 and factor 3. These are actually boxes are mixed up here. Communication, teamwork, in all the language you're going to see is factor 2 and mission support is factor 3. They all automatically count equally. We are not allowed to weight one more than the other. So in job achievement, you're going to consider things like their critical thinking skills, their problem solving skills, their leadership skills, employee development and mentoring. All those things are covered in factor 1, job achievement. Factor 2 on the right, communication and teamwork, you're going to consider their verbal and written communication skills and how well they get along with people, their coworkers, their supervisor, their customers, anybody that they interact with during the year. How does that work for them? And then if things need to get done and it's outside of my job description, I know we talked earlier about volunteering for some type of disaster relief situation, but if I volunteer for something of anything, I'm willing to get out of my job description and just help get stuff done because it needs to get done. And then we're going to consider that in the communication and teamwork factor. Mission support is really kind of the heart of the program. That is, you're going to have these organizational goals that we want to move forward every year. How well did I move those forward within the constraints of the cost and taskings and people, monetary and personnel resources? How are we able to get everything done effectively? We're always late, we're always behind, we were ahead, we saved money, we lost money. What did we do to move mission forward? So we consider each thing individually. So in your pay pool, the employees will have written to each factor individually. The supervisors will have written to each factor individually, and supervisor will have recommended those 3 scores, categorical, numerical, and pay pool, for each of the factors individually. That's your starting point within the pay pool. Now, in the training, we gave out those little white covered books if you were in person, or gave links if you were online to the factor scoring criteria. If we downloaded it from the AcqDemo website, we would see that for each factor, first off, we'd have to be sure we're looking at the right classification for the person that we're talking about. As we talked about, we might have an admin person who's NK, while most people are NH. There's different criteria for those groupings, so we have to be sure we're looking at the right grouping. The first column on this page is the criteria for the performance score, the pay-equal score. And I know it's just little tiny letters here, but just to give you the layout of the page, it will say things like the person did the work within the needed time frame, that it only required the appropriate level of supervision, they showed knowledge and skills to be able to get everything done, that kind of stuff. And there's a little area in the bottom for supervisors that says they developed and motivated their team, they did everything legally, that sort of stuff. So if they meet and sometimes exceed this criteria, that's what makes a 3. If they don't meet this criteria, that's a 1. If they substantially and consistently surpass this criteria, that's what makes a 5. So that's our scoring for that. The middle column is the categorical scores. These would be the least subjective of the process. The employee has to prove in their self-assessment with an example that they met the descriptor. Probably can't read this very well, but if I took NH3 as the first one on the list, that's something I mentioned before. It says considered a functional technical expert by others in the organization, is regularly sought out for advice and assistance. So if I want to get credit for that in my self-assessment, I'm going to say what I believe I am the functional or technical expert in, who sought me out during the year, just one example. Again, mine happened 300 times, but I'm gonna give you one example of who sought me out and what advice or assistance that I gave and the positivity of that advice or assistance. That's all I have to do. I don't have to go into 9,000 words of all the steps that it took to get there, all the meetings that we had, all the thought process I went through. Don't need any of that. I just need to say I'm the functional expert in AcqDemo training. Army Corps of Engineers sought me out for assistance with their business rules. I provided that and business rules were approved. Done. I've met the descriptor. Right? It's as simple as that. People are going to want to write way more than is actually required to meet a descriptor because they think the more they tell you about a descriptor, the better score they're going to get. That's not true. Remember, we're writing our documents for employees, at least, in WRI format. W being what work is it that I want you to consider in the pay pool. R is which of these descriptors did I meet? When I'm in a grouping, as I said before, if I've met all the descriptors of broadband 3, I'm going to be in the grouping of 3 high. That's like the rank order list that we looked at just before break. I'm going to be compared with everyone else who met all the descriptors for a score somewhere between 79 and 83 points. If I've met a descriptor 6 times, I've still just met the descriptor. I don't go any farther up the list. All it's doing is putting me in a grouping to be rank ordered with employees who met the same number of descriptors. So if I've met a descriptor once or I've met it 5 times, there's no difference to their score. That's a very hard concept for them to get through. They want to tell you more than they need to tell you. What they're going to be ranked on is the right column, the factor discriminators. What they want to get across to you is whatever W they're wanting to get credit for. Let's say in my case, I'm doing AcqDemo training. Okay, when I'm all done doing AcqDemo training this year, maybe I did 100 classes this year. When I'm all done doing those 100 classes, so what? What difference did that make to anyone in the world that I did that? If I'm an engineer, if I'm the administrative assistant, if I'm finance person, when I'm all done doing my financing, so what? What mission goals did I move forward? That's what they want to talk about in the I impact area. And that's the rank order criteria over here. It's very important, and this will not be clean this first year or two, that people use these key words in their writings. Employees writing to the descriptors, supervisors recommending if they're going to plus up or minus down the score from delta 0, their choices to pick from to support their case are the discriminators. They can't just write in their own voice and say, here's my rationale for why I want to, no, the only scoring criteria we have are these 3 columns: performance scores, categorical scores, numerical scores. Anything else somebody writes about is irrelevant to you in the pay pool. So if I wanted to say, Define, direct, I'm going to take the NH3, the bottom one. Define, direct, or lead highly challenging projects or programs. If I didn't use those words, define, direct, or lead a project or program, let's say that I use the word implemented a program or stood up a program or foot stomped a program, none of those words are words here that you are looking for to give them credit for. So then you have to play the wordsmith game and the connected dot game. The employee wrote this, but you have to give credit for only these things over here. Do these words that they wrote mean these words that I have to adjudicate? And that gets really messy and takes a lot more time. They want to use these words exactly as they are. They don't need all the words. They just need the keywords. If I'm supposed to define, direct, or lead a project or program, all I have to say is what program I defined, direct, or led, and what impact, when I was all done leading, directing, or defining, when I was all done with that this year, how did that move the mission forward? That's all I have to say. I don't have to get into, a thesis. I just have to use these words and tell about why that moved mission forward. And then same thing for supervisors. What we'll often see is Jane did a really, impressive job. She had all these challenges she took on, and this happened and that happened. And gosh, I think she did great things. Well, here are your words to rank order on: leadership role, mentoring, employee development, accountability, complexity, difficulty, creativity, scope, and impact. And let's say they're recommending a +3 because they feel she did great things. Great things aren't one of your things over here that you can give credit for. So that means nothing to you. Now you again have to play connect the dots. Well, she did great things. Did that mean any of these things? Because that's the only way we can plus up. So supervisors really need to use these discriminators and then justify why they're plussing up or minusing down based on those words only in their write-ups. Any other words they write, not relevant to you in the pay pool. That's what's going to be the challenge, is that people tend to way overwrite, and then you have to way overread stuff that's irrelevant to you for the scoring process. We cannot change this list. We actually are legally allowed to change column 1, the performance scores. We can supplement column 1 in the business rules with more defined things if we want to. And you didn't this year, but you could in future years if you want to. But you cannot change the descriptors and you cannot change the discriminators. They're locked in stone. Every employee in the world in AcqDemo gets scored on the same things. All right, so we want to see writings that use these keywords. And I'll show you samples coming up of what I mean by that. All right, here's some words in some of those words in bigger type, but let me see, do we have questions on that first, though? I see something came in chat, so let me just make sure there's. Okay, great. So it's 1 through 5. I'm good with that. Questions on the scoring criteria, maybe on what any of the words mean. If you've had time between whenever we met last April-ish and now, if you've looked at that anymore, are there any words in there that you have questions on, concerns about? Anything within that before we just keep moving forward? All right. So your first job in the pay pool is to read what the employee wrote, see if the supervisor supplemented anything relating to factor descriptors, and then this just becomes a counting exercise for you. If you feel they've proven with their examples that they've met all of them, then you give them a high score. If they've met most of them, but not all of them, you give a medium score. And if they've met less than most of them, you give them a low score. Now, employees have expected numerical scores. They also have expected categorical scores, and the expectations are only based on their pay. If they're lower paid in, this is broadband 3, if they're lower paid in broadband 3, the low score equivalent is GS12 step 1 through GS12 step 4. If you had anybody that converted over to AcqDemo from that pay range, they're supposed to get a low categorical score. Those, they're only supposed to meet 1, 2, or 3 of these descriptors for job achievement. That's what they're paid. If they do more than that, they're underpaid, and we need to move their pay up. Most of them, since for job achievement there's 6 descriptors, they would either do 4 or 5 of them then. That would put them in the medium area. That's the equivalent of everywhere in for NH3s, everywhere from GS12 step 5 to GS13 step 6. That's that group of people that we're expecting to get a medium categorical score. And then only those that were the equivalent of GS 13 step 7 through GS 13 step 10 should be meeting all of the descriptors. They're required to meet all of them because that's what they're paid to do. No one else is paid to meet all of them. So you're also now going to find people who are certainly and naturally going to try to write to all of them, whether they're expected to meet them or not. They're going to try their best. Meeting a descriptor means it is something that they consistently and independently did as a regular part of their job, not just something they did once. So we might see somebody that says, oh yeah, I did that one time. My boss was out and I took over for 2 weeks and I did that. That doesn't count. That's not a regular part of their job. That doesn't count as meeting a descriptor. It's a regular and consistent part of their position that they fulfilled, not a volunteer one-off sort of thing during the year. So this first go round that we were talking about earlier is that, let's just say I am in that GS 13, 7 to 10, now NH3 high category. Maybe I can meet all of these things, but we can only count from your day of conversion through 30 September, right? That's the only time they were in AcqDemo. We're only adjudicating AcqDemo work. They already got a WIGI buy-in to pay them for their full service of their work accomplished during GS, DPMAP. That's all done. So we can't consider anything that happened before your conversion date. We're only talking about conversion date through 30 September. So in that time frame, let's take descriptor 5 here. That's often the hardest one to meet. I've developed plans and techniques to fit a new situation to improve the overall program policies. And in doing this new thing, that's going to establish precedent that we're going to apply to enhance other existing processes. Am I really, within this abbreviated 3.5 month time period, going to start working on something new? It's not only going to improve my program, but it's going to establish precedent that we will have applied already to enhance other existing processes just from conversion date through 30 September. And certainly not everyone's going to have that opportunity. That doesn't mean that they did a bad job in this abbreviated period, though. This is where I said we might have to take some leeway this first year. Next year, when they have 12 full months to do this, they have to do that. In this abbreviated period, there may be times where there just weren't opportunities. Do we want to knock down their scores because we're in an abbreviated period and they didn't have opportunities? That's not really fair. We have to say we're in this sort of odd special cycle this first go round. Our job is going to be to what we talked about earlier. Did they do what they were supposed to do? And did we pay them appropriately for what they did? We're going to have to go a little off book this first year where maybe we can't do the strict counting job we're going to do in future years. We're going to have to look maybe at it just a little bit differently. Sorry if you're hearing background noise. I'm in a major condo renovation project right now, and I thought they weren't doing what they're doing today, but they are right outside my office. So anyway, the general rule will be this: all of them means high, most means medium, low means less than most means low. But this first year, you have leeway to deviate if you feel there's a more fair and equitable answer for the employee. And then once we get to, let's say we have, in our sample before, we had 8 people and 3 high, then we have to go over to the discriminators. And we're going to say, okay, of these 8 people, who demonstrated the most effective leadership role? Let's move them up to the list, the rank order list. Did anybody struggle in this area? Let's move them down the rank order list. All right, mentor and employee development. Who developed themselves and used their skills to help mentor and grow other employees? Both those things, let's move them up the list. Neither of those things, down the list. If they did one sort of, they can stay in the middle. Who out of our group of people had the most complex and difficult assignments? This is a new thing people are going to get uncomfortable with. Let's say that you had a group of 50 engineers. Not all 50 people had the most complex and difficult assignments this year. Some assignments were more complex and difficult than other ones. That's a rank order criteria. Well, that means that if that's true, we gave some people automatically an opportunity to score higher than other people because we gave them more complex and difficult assignments. So if I had an employee, I'm going to open this up for questions again. If I had an employee saying, well, that's not fair. The supervisor didn't give me that opportunity. They gave it to their favorite person over there. I didn't get that opportunity. What would you say to that supervisor and that employee? My question would be for you to answer. Why did a supervisor choose to give a more complex and difficult assignment to one person over another person? Why would they do that? What would you say? John, I see you unmuted. Yep.
Based on past performance, that the person that it was assigned to is the one that was a good fit and thought they would be successful, or knew they'd be successful at it based on prior.
Yeah, exactly. And I do that. I think most of us do that. If I have an assignment that came into me and I've got to assign people to work on it, I'm going to try to assign it to the people I think are going to be most successful based on past performance. Who do I think is going to be successful in this position? I'm not going to give it to somebody that I'm pretty sure is going to fail at it. But at the same time in GS, that didn't really matter. As long as people were here for the same length of time, they were going to get the same pay raises. But now it matters. The one I gave the opportunity to is going to have more opportunity for a higher score and a higher payout than somebody I didn't give that to. And so we need to shift our thought a little bit as supervisors in that I think again, I'm year 14 of this. If you think differently, please correct me. But I think many of us thought of GS13s as the same. If they're a GS13, they're a GS13, and all GS13s are the same. And so there's no difference. But in AcqDemo, there's a big difference. GS13 step 1 to GS13 step 10 is a pay difference of, say, 12 and 15, $27,000. I said, and from GS13 step 1 to GS13 step 6, their categorical expectation is medium. Now, he's supposed to meet some of the descriptors, most of them, but not all of them. The ones from GS13 step 7 to GS13 step 10 are supposed to meet all of them. So my GS13s are broken into 2 groups in AcqDemo, 3 mediums and 3 highs. They're not all the same. And to get from step 1 to step 10 was something like an 18 or a 19-year progression. If I'm paying somebody with 18 years more experience than somebody else, I certainly ought to be expecting more out of them when I'm paying them $27,000 more. But that's not something we had to think about before. Now we do. Employee development and mentoring is one of the descriptors we just talked about. Somebody paid higher should be mentoring somebody who's paid lower so that they're growing the skills so that they could someday take on those higher level assignments, but they're just not ready yet compared to the other people who've been here and had past performance to show they can be successful. But that's going to be conversation in the office now, that it wasn't a criteria before. It's a big one now because it says so on this particular slide, but on this particular factor in the discriminator area, that is one of the discriminators that chooses higher and lower rank order positions when you're adjudicating in the pay pool. All right, so descriptors, again, categorical scores, that's what employees write to. Discriminators are the rank order criteria, that's what supervisors write to. The two together give you the full picture to do your job within the pay pool. And we saw this slide in other classes, the high, low, medium thing we were just talking about. All right, so here's a sample appraisal we looked at, I think, in the last class. But let's look at this now from the sake of what you're going to see in the pay pool and what you do with it. So here's what an employee did. This is from another organization, but we get the idea. From, sorry, let me make one correction to this that I'm just seeing on the slide here. Hold on, sorry. Where's this one? I'm just going to take this off for a second. I'll be right back with you. All right, I'm going to just pull this up again. All right, so we're writing the WRI format W again is the work I want to get credit for. R are in theory the descriptors that I've met, and I is what mission goals I think I move forward. So your job within the pay pool will be to have, so we're talking here about the job achievement factor. The employee has given us some clues. There are 6 descriptors, and we tend to use an abbreviation that we teach for the employees to say, all right, of the 6, the first one on the list was being the technical expert thing. We're going to abbreviate that as J1. This is for when we're talking about the job achievement factor. The second one on the list, which is about employee development and mentoring, that's going to be J2, et cetera. The one that was do something new and innovative and precedent setting, that was J5. So you're going to have the list of factor descriptors right next to you as you're reading this appraisal. The employee is telling us they think they want credit for J1, J4, and J5. So you're going to pull up the list and you're going to say J1. I'm going to take that one first. This is somebody who's considered the functional expert. Somebody sought them out for advice and assistance. What the employee wrote here was sought out for advice, since we're looking for advice and assistance, and being sought out. Those are words right from the factor descriptor. From whom? Who sought them out? They say, well, the region on the automated audit process, now it differs from CONUS and no CONUS environment. That's what somebody sought them out for advice on. What did they do about that? What advice and assistance did they give? They actually created an SOP that outlines the approach to monitoring the audits in these 2 different areas. So we know from, if we read this whole thing, they designed this tool that does this audit tracking thing. So they are considering themselves the expert in auditing, and they were sought out by a regional office, and they created an SOP to answer the request for information. That's the advice and assistance they gave. With that, we can very quickly give them a check mark for J1. Yes, they achieved that. That's all we need to see. Now, in the real world, before that happened, again, they probably, if they're the expert in this thing, they probably got asked questions 1,000 times. They would have 1,000 examples to give, and they have to give one. As long as they've met the descriptor, they've met the descriptor. Now, when somebody inquired, it was probably from some sort of group request in a region. They could name the region, they could name the people that asked them, they could say the meetings that they held to discuss the issue. They could talk about all the steps that it took them to get there to understand what the question was. And then to create an SOP, that probably also had to have, maybe they did it by themselves, but it probably had to have some level of approval and some sort of level of review before it was ever distributed. And once it was distributed, it probably had all kinds of things. They have a big story to tell. We don't need to know that in the paper, right? All we need to know is, were they the expert in something? Did somebody ask them a question? And did they successfully answer the question? All done. All the rest of the stuff they had to do, they don't have to tell you in the pay pool. It's not part of your pay pool scoring criteria. All you have to know is, can I give them a check mark for J1, if that's what they want credit for? That's where people are going to overwrite. They are going to tell you the whole story. So for those of you that most likely supervise AcqDemo employees, you'll want to position yourself as the coach. Ask your employees to submit the draft well ahead of the deadline. You can't force them to change a single word, but you can certainly advise them to be wordsmith sensitive. If we have 200 people in the pay pool, if they filled up all of the white space on their self-assessment that's available, that would be 4.5 pages long. And supervisor still has to write their appraisal. Let's say that they wrote not as much, but a good amount. So that's 2.5 pages, let's just say. That means 7 pages for one employee's packet sent to you. If everybody did that and you had 200 people, that's 1,400 pages of stuff you'd have to read. And you're getting, like, if the pay pools are starting the week of November 11th and supervisors' appraisals are due at the end of October, you're going to have like a week to read 1,400 pages. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. There's not enough time for that. So we've got to be sure we're only writing about the pay pool scoring criteria and nothing more. That will never happen. Employees are always going to do different than what we say, but that's the coaching. Then they're also trying to get credit for J4 and J5. They rolled that up into one statement. Great. So we would do the same thing. We'd go read J4 and say, what does it say? Okay, on what they wrote here, can I give them credit for that? On J5, based on what it says, you're going to give them credit for that, or are they stretching? But they wrote, well, what we'll see a lot is employee write something and say, I want credit for this descriptor. And what they write literally has nothing to do with that descriptor. They're just throwing stuff at the page and hoping for the best. And you won't give them credit for that. Now, supervisor has recommended to you how many descriptors they met with their categorical score recommendation, right? If they met all of them, they're going to recommend 3 high. If they feel they met most of them, 3 medium. If they met less than most, 3 low. So supervisor is giving you the opinion of what they think. You're verifying whether you agree. And again, if you don't agree, the supervisor recommended 1 score and you're reading, you coming to a different decision, then in the pay pool meeting, we're going to call the supervisor in and say, hey, what's here on the page and what you're recommending? We don't see that. Help us. Right? That's what we talked about before we took our first break. So that's our first task. Our first task is that we're going to read this document and say yay or nay to the descriptors the employee has notated to us they're trying to get credit for. We're not worried about the impact statement yet. We're going to read it now, but we're going to come up to that as our second course within the pay pool. First course of action is to approve categorical scores, because again, that's going to determine our rank ordering groups. If somebody's in the wrong categorical region, they're going to be ranked with the wrong people. So we got to get them in the right categorical region before we can move on to rank ordering. Right, so that's step 1 of your job. Well, step 1 was reading. Step 2 was adjudicating categorical scores. Now, I just put some tips in here of what you might normally see that might cause some concern within the pay pool. And that is that we said the employee has an expected score range, categorical and numerical, if they're supposed to hit. If they got a different one, whether that was higher or lower, recommended by the supervisor, that's a red flag to us. That means that their pay was way off during the year. Do we agree with that? When we're reading this, do we agree that we were way off? That's our first thing. We're expecting to see a score categorically and numerically. Is that what we see? If we don't see that, is it supported? Now, if the categorical score is lower than the expected range, then back to that conversation we had before, does that mean we want to consider firing them? Or does that just mean they weren't given the opportunity this year to work at a level consistent with that? And while that's not great, that's not their fault. And we can give a higher score for that, not as far as low as we might go otherwise. The third one is probably the biggest concern of all, and that is somebody who is scored, recommended by the supervisor, in a higher broadband level than their classification. We most commonly see this with NH3s getting NH4 scores. If I'm an NH3 high, let's say my expected score is 83. This is the most common scenario I see. That's the top pay of NH3. For some reason, if I am in GS and I'm at step 10, I'm not expecting to get another step increase unless I get a promotion to a GS 14 job. For whatever reason that I've not yet grasped over my 14 years, if I'm an expected score 83 in AcqDemo, that's the top score of NH3, somehow I'm still expecting to get higher scores than that without getting a promotion. In GS, I know I had to get a promotion. In AcqDemo, I don't feel I need to have a promotion. It doesn't work that way. A score of 84 and higher means they have met most of the broadband 4 descriptors consistently throughout the year, but yet they're not a broadband 4 employee. They shouldn't be given that work. They're not classified for it, and they're not being paid for it. So they should have never been given that work to begin with. If they were, that's a big problem for you. If the employee was to be approved by you as an 84 score or higher, that would mean that they're classified wrong. They would have a chance to grieve that and ask for their job to be reclassified as an NH4 job. And if they were to win that grievance, they would have to be back paid for all of the time they were an NH3 employee doing that NH4 work. This just happened at a Navy organization. It turned out to be over $1 million fine that organization got, because when one employee grieved, everyone in that situation grieved. It was over $1 million that they had to back pay. So if somebody is scored in a higher broadband level than their position is classified, that's a big red flag to you. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe they're on a temporary promotion. In that case, it's totally valid, right? We're paying them to be in the higher broadband. We awarded them a temporary promotion and we're paying them to be that. We absolutely can improve that score. But if we're not expecting to see that, and it shouldn't be happening, oh boy, what's happening? Is the employee just overreaching and they didn't really do that work? Or did the supervisor mess up and give them that work when they shouldn't have given them that work? What are we going to do about this? So it may require us to reclassify a position. It may require them to be on a different PRD. They've accreted duties in their current position, and the position that they're classified as is now no longer the right one. But we're going to have to take some sort of corrective action if we approve those kind of scores. That's the biggest warning of all within your pay pool. What if somebody did something, the last bullet here, that is really, really significant, but it's just a temporary situation? They're working on maybe a high-level IPT that's way above their normal position. And because of that, they're getting a much higher level score than we would expect them to get. But if we move their pay up that high, they can't sustain that over time, because when this temporary project's done, they're going to be back to their regular job. Your business rules allow us within the pay pool then to take their CRI salary increase money and roll some or all of it over to a cash award. So we only move their pay up to what they will be able to sustain over time. So that's just another thing to take a look for when you're doing this. So when we're giving scores out, if they're within the employee's range, great, let's move on to the next person. If they're way low or way high, how did that happen? We now have to stop and analyze this and figure out what we should do about this. Do we need to reclassify somebody's job? Did we just, employees didn't have an opportunity this year and that's okay? Is this a one-time, one-off thing that we need to give a big cash award but not a big pay increase? What do we do about these things that are not within the range that we're expecting them to see? All right, so just tip sheet here for once we're in the pay pool to do some stuff with. Slide 27 is one I really like to hand out to all employees, supervisors as well, but all employees. This is the rank order criteria for all three factors, right? These are the discriminators. It's the only area that we have where we can see all three factors in the rank order criteria on one page. So employees, I said often get really worried that these things are happening in this pay pool that they don't understand. They say, well, we're being rank ordered and we don't know what's going on. But here's the criteria. Right, for job achievement and innovation, here are the things you're going to just consider for their rank ordering. For communication teamwork, what you consider, mission support, what you can consider. So this is where we're looking for their impact statements to talk about these kinds of things, and where the supervisor appraisals especially is pointing out these sections where they feel somebody should be plussed up or minus down. So let's take a look at what we mean by that. The slide we looked at once before for supervisor appraisals. How do you know anything the employee claimed is true? That's the first thing the supervisor has to tell you in their supervisor appraisal. Their opening statement is going to be that they looked at what the employee wrote and they can factually validate everything the employee claimed is true. Sorry, it's another, well, hold on, I'll bring that back up in a second. It says DHA on here, forget DHA. I did this very quickly yesterday and clearly didn't edit very well. All right. So is what they're claiming factually true? Supervisor can tell you, yes, I have looked at the appraisal and I can say for certainty that I have factually validated everything they claimed is true. And with that, I would say I concur with the employee self-assessment. That means that you can take everything the employee claimed as factually validated. That's how you know. That's why the employee doesn't have to overwrite. The supervisor is going to offline validate their claims and tell you whether they agree or not in their opening statement. They might partially concur. And then if they do that, they need to tell you where they differ from what the employee wrote to what they believe is more accurate. Or they could say what the employee wrote they don't agree at all with and why. But that'll be their opening statement. Then they'll say, were there any contributions or any descriptors that the employee met or contributed that they didn't write about that I think they should get credit for? If so, I'm going to include that as a supplement to their assessment that you should in the pay pool consider. And then I'm going to use those discriminators. If I want to plus up or minus down from their expected score to the numeric score I'm recommending to you, I'm going to pick from that discriminator list and then explain why in those areas I feel they were underpaid or overpaid. And then lastly, I have to support the 135 pay equal score. I feel the employee met and sometimes exceeded the criteria in these ways. I feel they substantially and consistently surpassed that criteria in these ways. I've got to write something to support my recommended score to you. And so then their document might look something like this. I concur with the employee self-assessment. Everything they claimed, accurate. They did not write to descriptor J2, that employee development mentoring thing, but I know that they did that, and I think they should get credit for that, and here's my proof. Then I do believe that they demonstrated significant mission impact, and for that, I believe we should raise their salary, and I think it's sustainable, and in these bucket areas. Across the factor discriminators I have to choose from in the leadership area, here's why I feel this particular employee is doing things above and beyond what equivalent position people are doing. We're not going to name the other people, but we're going to say, here's where they're going above and beyond and why I think their pay should be raised in this area. And then complexity and difficulty, they found a way to do something that's never happened before. This is the very first time that we have found a way to make this work. For that, again, that's an achievement I think should be award worthy. And then the quality of her work substantially and consistently exceeds the criteria. In fact, she was the employee of the year. So she should definitely get a 5. So within a few words, we don't need a novel, but in a few words, we know whether the employee's information is validated or not. Was there anything that they missed? Do we want to plus them up or minus them down? And do we want to give a 1, 3, or 5 recommended score? And in that order, concur or not, supplement anything they didn't already write about, and then plus up or minus down, and or 1, 3, 5. And then you have all the data to do your job, right? From the employees area, we thought they only met 3 of the descriptors. That would have been a 3 low, but supervisor gave them credit for a 4th one. Now they're into 3 medium, right? So supervisor moved them up into a whole different category with their write-up than what the employee did. And they do feel it should be a plussed up score. And so they're going to recommend maybe a +1, a +2, it looks like from what they're writing here, and a pay equal score of a 5. And then your job will be to say, yes, I agree with that, or no, I don't. Oops, sorry. The rank order thing we talked about before, then you'll do your job. So if we put them in 3 medium, we'll rank them with the 3 mediums. We put them in 3 high, we'll put them within the 3 highs. Whatever category they're in is where we'll use the rank order criteria using the discriminators to put them in the proper rank. Everybody, as I mentioned once earlier, could have tied at 83. There's literally no difference. Everybody was outstanding. We give them all 83s. But if you're using that criteria, some people did demonstrate better leadership skills than others. Some people did use their employee development to mentor more than other people did. Some people did have more complex and difficult assignments than some of the other people did. Any of that particular criteria can move people up or down the list. And you'll be moving people a lot until you get comfortable that you've got the rock solid final list that you feel is accurate. We do that for every factor. Tip sheet number 2 here. Your homework is to come prepared with having read all of the appraisals before the meeting. The meeting time is not the time to begin reading. We've got to have read everything ahead of time. If you feel there are any discrepancies, then you will bring those up within the pay pool. Now, your pay pool business rules, Don, let me know if this is still true, had an interesting thing saying that we're going to assign these things out for a couple people to read so that everybody doesn't necessarily have to read every single appraisal. If the people assigned to read the appraisals, there's going to be a couple, more than one, agree on the recommended scores, they're going to be deemed at least temporarily approved. But if they differ in their opinion, then we're going to open it up for the full panel discussion. Regardless, we're going to have the full panel looking at the spreadsheet to do the final rank ordering. But as our first preliminary cut at this, we're going to sort of divvy up the work. But you're still going to have to read all of them. In case it opens up to the full panel, you got to be familiar with everything before it goes. One thing to consider, though, is what, if anything, do we want to do? The word prorating we used before because this first year is abbreviated, but in a full year, what if next year when you're in for a full 12 months, somebody came on and was only here for 4 months. They don't have a chance to do everything that somebody else had to do in 12 months. And so when we rank order them, they might rank order at the bottom and be at risk of termination. That doesn't really reflect the quality of the work that they did. And so do we want to take any of those as one-offs? If they're only here for 8 months, do we want to prorate any of their awards? Just business rules to think about as you make your way down the path. All right. First year, the thing I mentioned just way earlier when we first started talking, does it appear that anybody is substantially underpaid? You're likely going to see this. You're going to get somebody who's coming over from GS and base. Maybe you started them at step 1, but they're able to do way more than that. They might be working at the equivalent of like 3 medium, which we said is at least step 5 of a grade. And so that, are they really justified with 4 step increases in 1 year based on what we're seeing? We think they are. What we inherited from GS just didn't make sense. How big of a correction do we want to make this year? Do we find that other one I said, somebody who's paid at the top of the broadband, but they're not even coming close to meeting all the descriptors? What do we do now? We've passed them on all these years. We could have held them back in GS, but we didn't. And now we've inherited this problem in AcqDemo. What are we going to do about it? We probably don't want to fire them this year when we told them they were totally fine last year. But we also need to get their skills up to their current pay level. How long do we want to give to them with that? I typically see that being a 2-year period. Or say, okay, we're in a whole new program right now. We can actually take and blame the program for this. Hey, we're in a whole new program right now. It has whole different scoring criteria than we ever had. To be fair to everyone, we've got to score everybody on the same criteria. We've never asked this of you before, but now we have to. So to be fair, we're going to give you 2 years. And we're going to give you training, and we're going to give you whatever is necessary to get you up to that level, so that we can adjudicate you. For these first 2 years, we're just going to give you whatever score, delta 0 or -3 or whatever score we want to give. But after that, we're going to have to throw you in with everybody else. We'll protect you for 2 years, but after that, we're going to have to take adverse action if we don't get this up to speed. All right. So, no, just things to think about. That was a lot to think about. Let me come over. What comments, questions, thoughts have you on all of that? Categorical scores, numerical scores, anomalies we're likely to see, steps where we would take based on those anomalies, communication we would give to employees based on those anomalies. What are your thoughts?
Hey, Tom, I'll confirm what you said. Anyone between -3 and +3, where the business rules say 2 people are going to check those, and then anyone outside of those, either the very low scored people or the very high scored people, everyone's going to have to review those and make sure that they concur.
Great, thanks, Don.
And then I did notice, I think shortly after break, Jen Reardon had her hand up for a question. Jen, was that question answered?
Yeah, kind of. I just to confirm. So when it comes to low, medium, and high on the categorical score, high is if you meet all the descriptors, low is if you meet 1, medium is anything in between that.
Not quite. So medium is most. So for job achievement, let me see if I can come back to wherever that slide is. Here we are. For job achievement, most, and we're defining most as more than half. So for job achievement, there are 6 descriptors. So to get a medium score, they would have to meet 4 or 5 of those. If they met 1, 2, or 3 of them, they would be in the low category. 4 or 5, they would be in medium. All 6, they would be in high. Okay. For the other 2 factors, communication and teamwork or mission support, there's only 4 descriptors. So if they meet all 4, they'd be in high. If they met 3, they'd be in medium. If they met 1 or 2, they would be in low.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful.
So yeah, it's a math game of defining most being more than half. And the numbers, unfortunately, for all 3 factors aren't the same, just to make it more complicated. Good question. What other questions, comments, thoughts have we? All right, one last little thing. We'll take one just very short break again, then we'll finish off. And that is the pay pool thing that we've been talking about, but just to have slides on this. Pay pool score is the 1, 3, 5 thing. It's going to be the thing you're most familiar with. We're only using it currently if there becomes a reduction in force. It becomes the employee's rating of record for the purpose of reduction in force ranking. Otherwise, currently we're not using it for anything that I'm aware of. But they get a 1, 3, or 5 for every factor. In order to get a final score of a 5, because since we have 3 factors, the 3 factors have to average out to more than 4.3. That means if they got 2 5s and a 3, or all 3 5s, their final pay pool score would be a 5. If they get only 1 5 or all 3s, they would be a 3. If they get a 1 for any one factor, there's no math at all. They're an automatic 1, even if they got 3s in the other factors. If they get 1 1, they're an overall 1. If they get a 1, then we have to take adverse action. Either give them a memorandum for record or put them on a contribution improvement plan. So the pay pool scores, like I said, if we're to consider, and you've already done this before, but now in using the AcqDemo criteria, what would consistently, substantially surpassing that criteria mean? So that would consistently apply that thought process to those we award 5s to. We cannot force a distribution of 5s. We have to just let things fall where they may. So the Army average had been around 60% 5s, 40% 3s, but that crept up a little bit last year. It was almost close to 70% last year. But no forced distribution. So whatever you think is right is good. Now, if we do have a score of a 1, or if we have a numeric score that is below their expected range, where we need that adverse action thing, that is then look at, did the supervisor do the right thing during the year? We shouldn't see any this year. The only way somebody came into AcqDemo is if they weren't on a PIP in GS. So if they weren't on a PIP in GS, how could they possibly have fallen that far in these couple months in AcqDemo? So we shouldn't see any scores in that range this first year, but in future years, if we see a score outside of the range that's going to maybe force adverse action, the legal requirements, the supervisor, when they notice concerns, had to take immediate action during the year and give the employee the proper coaching and opportunities to improve. Did that happen? If that didn't happen, we can't improve these scores. That's the supervisor's fault, not the employee's fault at that point. So we've got to be sure if we're considering any adverse action scores, supervisor's done the right thing during the year. If not, we might want to take the supervisor score down and not the employee score. So just a thought on that. All right, that takes us through that. Now let's take a look at the compensation side of the house. Some pay pools typically do not see the compensation elements of the payouts. The sub pay pool spreadsheet at least doesn't include any of that. It's only in the main pay pool spreadsheet where we see it. I'll show you that as we get through this. So this is really just math game, and the spreadsheet is doing most of the work. When we have these scores submitted to the pay pool, and the pay pool administrator populates the spreadsheet, it's already distributed all of the money based on what it sees in the scores. And then every time you change a score, it recalculates and redistributes the money. So this is a spreadsheet doing the work based on your rank ordering and scoring, basically. Now, as we get more and more into AcqDemo, it may become apparent that we want to have more business rules that relate to our compensation philosophy. You already have in your business rules guidance on initial pay setting. Again, when we were in GS, so many people started everybody at step 1 of a grade. All AcqDemo says is pay them somewhere within the broadband. That's a big variance. So where should we start people and how should we do that? There's a whole section of that in your business rules. Then when we're progressing people, the rule that I see becoming more and more popular that I like is that within a person's pay range for the position that they currently hold, when they're just learning the job, we would say, well, then their score should be withheld to within this certain range of scores. Then when they can do the full performance level of the job, then their scores could advance to these next set of range of numbers. If they ever become the expert in that particular job, then they could advance to the higher regions of the pay range appropriate for that kind of position. But that gives greater consistency to supervisors' ratings and pay pools decisions if we have more structure to things. Again, this first year is going to be so chaotic because it's all new to everyone and we're in an abbreviated period. But by next year, as we learn and go through the pay pool process this year, will there be additional compensation strategy things we want to put in place? I said right now you only have one control point, and that's for the NH4 non-supervisors. Again, do you want to have more than that? Do you want to have anything in NH2? Do you want to have it in any other broadband? If so, what are they as we go? So in your pay pool, you're going to have 3 buckets of money to distribute. Let me take the middle one because, as I said earlier, that's the easiest one for your business rules. General pay increase, the thing that used to be called COLA. That is whatever Congress decides and the president signs off on, whoever that might be by January, then that money goes to everyone within your pay pool. We can withhold from those people who are in the overcompensated region if we want. Your business rules say that we won't. The only people that might have something withheld is if they are currently on the term retained pay, meaning they make more than their positions allowed to be paid already. They only get half of the general pay increase then, so that someday we catch up to their current pay and they are paid within the range of what their position should be paid. But otherwise, everybody gets the general pay increase. CRI, contribution rate increase, that's a second pay increase that the pay pool can give out. Again, that's sort of the step increase kind of money that would have been given out in GS. It says our money that we have to give out is to add up all the salaries and filled positions on 30 September. Even those people who aren't eligible for the pay pool, put some of their money in, can't be less than 2% of that total. This first year, I believe it's 2.4% for the first year organizations. Though they were going to take that number up, I just don't know if they ever did, but it's around 2.4 to 2.5%. But can't ever be less than 2% in future years. AcqDemo program office often caps that at a certain percentage, saying no matter what, well, we can't go less than 2. For non-first year organizations, don't go more than this. It's really a fallback to the old NSPS days where they gave out double the amount of salary increase money than was budgeted. It took 8 to 10 years to catch up to that debacle. So Congress is still keeping a close eye on these demos and comparing them to GS progressions. We usually progress a little bit faster than GS, about a third of the time faster, but we still plateau at a certain amount that we shouldn't go past. And then contribution awards are 1% of the total of filled positions plus locality pay on 30 September. We typically hold back 10% of that money to use for cash awards during the year and give out another 90% during the pay pool period. There was a cap on that for years and years and years after AcqDemo, but that cap just went away. And so now we can pay as much as we can afford to pay within the organization in cash awards, but no less than 1% of the total salaries plus locality of everyone in the pay pool on 30 September. So whatever those totals are is what we have to give out. On the opening page of the spreadsheet, the pay pool administrator types that in. Here's the amount of money that we have to give out. Here are our business rules and how that money is given out. And then that's why the second tab of the spreadsheet gives out all the money based on the scores. So remember our fun little graph of how scores are determined. Expected scores are anywhere from 0 to 100. 0 is the equivalent of GS1 step 1. 100 is the equivalent of GS15 step 10. No other score within AcqDemo is the equivalent of anything else within GS. So an 83, well, that's the top of broadband 3 for NH3s, and NH3s compare GS is compromised of GS12s and 13s. GS13 step 10 is not the same as 83. No score between 0 and 100 equates exactly to GS anything. Your business rules say the one stop point for the NH4 non-supervisors will be 92. And it sort of seems to imply it's the equivalent of GS14 step 10. It's not. It's the closest thing to GS14 step 10 that we have, but it's not the same. It's actually a little bit more than GS14 step 10. And so if somebody in that particular control point position reaches a 92, that's more than they would have gotten under GS14 step 10. Which means actually, if the rule is if my pay goes beyond step 4 of the next grade, if they were to exit, if they reach the top of that pay range and they were to exit out back to GS, they could actually exit out as a 15, even though they never competed for it, because their pay went past step 4 of a GS 15 step 4. But anyway, no score in AcqDemo other than 0 and 100 equates exactly to GS anything. And then remember, we have these rails, upper rail and lower rail. That determines the scores that somebody can be within to be considered Region C in the spreadsheet terms. They're paid appropriately for their positions. If they get a score less than that range, they're in range A, overcompensated. If they get dramatically more than that score, more than 2 step increases ahead of that score, actually more than 3 step increases, because it's 8% from the standard pay line to the lower rail. More than 3 step increases or more off, then they'd be in region B, greatly undercompensated. We've got to accelerate their pay up. And so your rules are, as long as I am within the rails or better, I'm going to get all the awards. That's the one we talked about before. So even if I got from the standard pay line, my expected score, I got -1, -2, or -3, I'm still within the upper rail area. And I still get GPI. I still get a salary increase, and I still get a cash bonus. It's just a lower percentage than if I had gotten a higher score. And it sort of shows here that chart on slide 42. The only difference is your overcompensated region, they are going to get the GPI. The AcqDemo rules, we can give the GPI, but we don't have to. And some organizations don't. If their score is so far off and so low that we're considering terminating them, some organizations feel it doesn't feel right to give them a general pay increase if we're about to terminate them. So they say, no, we're going to deny it, and they have that right. Your business rules, though, are yes. No matter what, the person's going to get the GPI. But if they're overcompensated, they will not get a CRI, and they will not get a CA. Everyone else does. All right, then. Just to show this for one particular person, we looked at this in last class, but just to review. This is an NH3 employee whose pay this year is $97,392. That equates with an expected score of 75. As long as they get 72 or better, they're going to get all of the awards. But if they get 75 or better, then they're going to get even bigger awards, right? The more they beat 72 by, the bigger their CRI and CA awards become. Employees will often question, why is the upper rail number lower than the lower rail number? Why is the lower rail number the highest number? Only on slide 44 can you ever give them a visual demonstration of why this is. So I tend to keep this slide handy as well in case ever asked, and you can pull it out. If whatever my pay is, we draw a straight line across from that to the rails, the very first line that we intersect is the upper rail. And if we drop down from there, we're at the lowest number of the range. If I keep drawing across, the second number I intersect with is a standard pay line, so that's why that's the middle number. And if I keep going yet further, the last line I intersect with is the lower rail. That's why it's the highest number. Mathematically, it's 8%. Whatever my pay is right now, if we added 8% to that, that's what the higher number is. If we deducted 8% from that, that's what the lower number is. So this overall range is a 16% range, right? A GS step increase is 3%. So the overall range, we're talking a little bit over 5 step increases to still be within my rails and paid appropriately and getting awards. All right. Payroll funding, I repeated. So here's just a demonstration of how the spreadsheet is working. So let's say that first person we looked at with the 75, his name is Joe. But Joe, at the end of the day, you awarded a score of 77. That's a delta difference of +2. Because Army pays off of the upper rail, we'd have to say, well, what does 77 mean at the upper rail? That, for sake of calculations, is $109,442,000, a difference then of what we paid him of $12,050. It doesn't mean that's what he's going to get. It just means those are our 2 points. We paid him the 75, but he scored at 77. We're paying it off upper rail. What's the difference? 6, she'd be with outside the rail. She does not. Does. The person who got delta 0, they get a pay increase. Person who got -1, they get a pay increase. Everybody within the rails gets a pay increase. So we add up what all the delta differences are. In this slide example, it's $47,394. We say, well, how much money do we have within the pay pool? This pay pool has $10,486 to give out. And I used the term before that wasn't comfortable for someone I saw notes to say, we're going to prorate this down then. They can't have these full dollar amount awards because we don't have that much money in the budget. And AcqDemo won't let us go over budget. So we have to prorate them down to whatever percentage we could pay out to stay within our budget. And then we do the same thing for the CA cash awards. It's the same $47,394 they earned. How much money do we have to give out in cash awards? Maybe it's different than what we have to give out in salary. In this case, it's true. This pay pool has a little bit more money to give out in cash awards than they had in salary. So we have to prorate down still, but not quite as far. And then the spreadsheet does that. It prorates everybody down. Now, so we're aware when employees submit their self-assessments, it's going to have a box on the Castanet self-assessment screen that says, if you were to get a CA cash award, which normally something like 98% of the people do. The only person not getting a cash award is somebody who's in that overcompensated region, right? So it's probably 100% for you this year, probably 98, 99% in most years. So if I'm going to get a cash award, chances are I am. Do I want to get that all in cash? Or do I want to cash in some of my cash contribution award for time off hours? Your business rules say I can request up to or buy up to 40 hours of time off within any given year, up to 80 hours cumulative. So I can choose to cash in 100% of my CA award if I can do that and get 40 hours, if that works out for me. Or I could say, you know what, let's split it 50-50. Give me 50% of this in cash for my bank account right now because I need some money, but let me take the other 50% and convert that in for time off. So I can do that at 25%, 50%, 75%, or 100%. If I want, I can do 0 and just get it all in cash. But if I want to cash it in for time off, I choose that when I submit my self-assessment. And then the spreadsheet calculates accordingly and buys their time off. Your other one that we talked about before is there anyone who got a higher score because of a special situation that we want to only move their pay up so far to what we think they can sustain and then carry over the rest of that as a second cash award? Don't have to do this, but if any situations arise, your business rules allow for it. We take that all into consideration, we make the necessary adjustments, and voila, the spreadsheet gives out all of its money. Possible that there's money left over at the end, that the people didn't earn high enough scores to use up all of the money. And then we could discretionarily give it out or not use it, whatever the pay pool decides to do at that particular point. The questions that you have on pay pool money, what money is in the pay pool and how it gets distributed, because you will likely get questioned on this and you will have the joy of explaining this going forward. So what questions have you on pay pool funds and fund distribution? Jennifer, Reardon.
Hey, yeah, so if I'm reading this right for Joe contributor, his current basic pay is $97,392. He is getting to his current basic pay, he's getting added $2,666.
That is correct.
Okay. And then the cash award.
One-time cash award, right, of $3,504.
Understood. Okay, got it.
And then if for any reason we took that $2,666 and said, you know what, we don't want to give that all in salary increase for some reason, we can split that out and give some of that as a second cash award called a carryover award. They're still going to get $3,504 as his CA award, but we could also give them a second cash award of carryover if we don't want to give that all in salary. The spreadsheet's going to give it all in salary unless we tell it not to for the CRI. But if we feel we want to override the spreadsheet, we can. Other questions? All right, then let me just put it in your brain, something that's never going to feel comfortable for employees, but just for the pay pool's perspective, the thing that we've talked about, a delta zero, meaning if Joe was supposed to get 75, he got 75. That means that they were paid appropriately for their contributions. That's the system's goal. That is almost no employee's goal. Nobody wants to work all year long and get a 0 score at the end of the year. Now, in your case, everybody other than the Army, if they get a delta 0 score, they do not get a CRI award. And that's why it's such a negative connotation in most organizations. It's positive to AcqDemo's perspective. It's not positive to the employee's perspective. But at Army, a delta 0, again, that's the middle number of their range, that 72, 75, 79 number. As long as Joe beats 72, he's going to get a CRI award, and 75 beats that by 3 positions. So he's going to get a payout like we just saw, even with delta 0, if I come back one, even when somebody got a delta 0, in this case, that was James, he still gets a CRI award. That's the difference at Army versus everywhere else. But delta 0 is the goal of AcqDemo. Again, nobody wants to work all year and get a 0. But that's AcqDemo's goal. And somehow, the more we socialize that, a few more people will come on board, but I don't think you'll ever get 100% of people on board with that thought. Positive delta means that they've been underpaid. If you ask somebody if they want to be underpaid all year and never have that made up to them, very few people are going to say yes. But if you ask them if they want to get a delta 0 score at the end of the year, very few people are going to say yes. But it can't be both. Right? Either I'm appropriately paid or I'm underpaid. A positive delta means I got a +1, a +2, a plus anything. It means I was underpaid and it's never going backwards to have that made up to the employee. They'll always have been underpaid. And a negative score, that which we talked about before, AcqDemo considers they were overpaid. But was that because of performance issues or because of opportunity issues? We want to be sure that we communicate appropriately that if we give any of those out to the employee. So again, just another tip sheet thought to have in your toolbook. Let's take a look, while we have just a couple minutes left, at the spreadsheet. So I'm going to stop sharing this, in theory, and try to share the spreadsheet. And let me try to make that a little bit bigger. So in theory, at the moment, you should hopefully on your screen be seeing the pay pool spreadsheet. So mentioned on the first tab of the spreadsheet is where we're going to put in whatever the scenario is that we have to give out. So whatever Congress gives out for GPI this year, we'll type that in. Let's just say last year's couple of years were 4.1 and 4.7, may or may not be that big this year. But that's going to be pre-populated in the spreadsheet. We won't be able to change that. Whatever gets awarded, gets awarded. Then we will say for CRI funding, how much can we afford to pay? I said the rule I think is still in place is 2.4% your first year. It's going to be less than that in future years. So if we say this is our first year, we're going to be able to pay out at a little bit higher than other places. Then, is there anything that we want to set aside and not give out via the spreadsheet? We're going to say, no, we don't want to do that. We're just going to let the spreadsheet do its thing and see what happens. Then we're going to say for the CA award, how much are we going to hold back to give out as cash awards during the year? In your business rules say typically it's going to be 10%. We'll give out 90% in the pay pool. So we're going to list that. Do we want to hold back any of that money and manually distribute? No, we don't. We're going to let the spreadsheet do its thing. Then what rules do we have for how we give out our money? For the CRI award, Army's paying out of upper rail. So then that answer should be a 1. So we're going to change this to a 1. For the CA award, Army also pays that off of upper rail. That should say a 1. And so that's what it says here. Then we can set minimum award amount, saying if somebody were to get, let's say the spreadsheet calculated out that they're going to get a 12% or $12 raise. Do we want to really give them a $12 raise? Or we want to say if it's a certain dollar amount, if it's less than, let's just say $100, we're just going to zero that out and not give anything, because anything less than that might be insulting. Or we might say if it's less than $100, let's just bump everybody up to $250 and say we're not going to give anything less than that. Those are our rules we could choose on here. We don't have any of those in our business rules, so we're just going to say we're going to let that go. So the pay pool administrator will have pre-populated this with your pay pool's rules. And we come over to the data tab is where we're going to see everybody's name. Let me see if I probably. I can get rid of that. So we can see a few more names on here, but what we'll see is that we'll have columns, the first name, the last name, the middle initial, if they're a junior, a third, or whatever, their EDIPI number, their Castanet ID number, what pay pool they're in, what sub pay pool they're in, what office they're in. In the pay pool, we're ready, if we're, let's say we're in, the St. Louis pay pool, do we really know if they're a junior or senior? If we have two people with the same name, we probably need to know that. If we don't have that situation, we can probably get rid of that column. Do we need to know middle initials? Probably not ever. Do we need to know their EDIP at this point? Probably not. Do we know their Castanet ID, their people ID, any of those things? What we have at the very bottom of the spreadsheet is an area where we can place X's where we don't want to see the columns. So we said we don't want to see middle initial, and we don't want to see their suffix. We don't want to see their IDPI. We don't want to see their people IDs. We don't want to see any of these things. We just put X's in these columns. And the spreadsheet, then when we refresh it, we'll start to get rid of those particular columns. And then they're gone. And then we don't have quite as much stuff to look across as we do if we have stuff that we just don't really need to see. Again, if we don't have anybody in presumptive status, we don't need to see that. So we could get rid of whatever columns we want to have to make this more readable. But what you're mostly going to be looking at in the pay pool are the scores. There's a little link up here in the spreadsheet that we can click on. It will take us right over to the scores part of the spreadsheet. Now, if we look at this, we say it got rid of the names. So that's not so helpful. That's why we might want to get rid of some of these spreadsheets, some of these columns, so we can see our views better when we go to look at that. But it will give us what categorical score the supervisors recommended, what numerical scores they've recommended, what pay goal scores they've recommended. And our job will be to say, all right, let's just take a look at factor 1 job achievement. Did anybody get 4 high? So instead of looking at everybody, let's just look at the 4 highs. And we'll say, okay. Well, and as we said before, gosh, we only have one person in this category. Well, we can't do rank ordering if we've only got one person. So then what do? Well, we'd have to take this person as a one-off then. We know that their expected score from column AX over here is 80. And we'd read their appraisal, and what the supervisor is recommending is 80, 81, and 80. Well, that's going to round to an 80. So at the end of the day, this person is supposed to get an 80, and they're going to get an 80. When we're reading the appraisal, do we feel good about that? Do we say, you know what, I think the supervisor is kind of a Scrooge. When we're looking at this person did amazing things, I think his score should be higher. Well, then we can just come in and we can raise them. We can say instead of 80, this is in the 4 medium area. We're going to say we think then that they should get, or for an 80, sorry, that should be in a 4 low area. But we think they should get higher than that. Let's say we think they should get an 82. And we're going to say across the board, we think that makes sense. And we make the changes. Now, I'm going to turn this back for just a second to where the scores were. Oops. Let's just take our very first person here. I'm just going to highlight their names. This is going to be Sarah. Sarah was supposed to get a 70, and she got a 71, a 70, and a 71. That's going to average out then to a 71 final score. Let me go all the way to the far end of the spreadsheet. And I said, this is a huge spreadsheet. It turns out then that our CRI that's been approved is $2,098, and her cash award is $497 for a grand total of $2,595. Now let's just go change Sarah's scores. Let's just come back over and say, you know what, for Sarah, we just don't think the 71s are right. We think she did her job and nothing extra. We think she should get 70 across the board. So if I change this to 70 and 70, and now I go look at her scores, the spreadsheet will have recalculated. Right now she's going to have a $1,639 CRI and a $381 total award. So I said every single time we do a score change, the whole spreadsheet recalculates everybody's awards. Because not only are we affecting hers, we actually changed everybody's scores. So we took money away from her. That meant there was money to redistribute to everyone else. If we raised her scores, we're giving more money to her, we're taking away from everyone else. All right, so PayPal administrators will go through training in depth on how to use the spreadsheet. The PayPal administrator will be the person in the PayPal running the spreadsheet for you. They'll have it up on a big screen so we can see stuff. But one of the things I mentioned earlier, one of the first things we're going to want to do is talk about what columns do we just not want to see so we can get rid of a bunch of this stuff. It's just too big. We don't need to see it. We don't need to see their locality percentages. We just don't care. Right. So we could go hide those columns. So more and more to come on spreadsheet for the PayPal administrator so they can properly run this for you. And I said there's these wildcard columns. I said, gosh, if there's something that we want to calculate on, but let me show you what the spreadsheet can do to begin with. It has a thing called Rails and ROR tab. We can say, gosh, we have 2 people that are in the A range right now. That's above the rail. Those people we're going to have to take adverse action on. We can go say, all right, who are those people? We have only one person that ended up in the B range. As Don said earlier, if anybody's in A or B, the whole pay pool has to review those cases before they ever get approved. So we have people in those ranges, we'd have to go look at them. Everybody else is within the rails. So we can see that here. We can see the rating of record right now. We've got, what is it, 68% who are getting 3s, 31%-ish that are getting 5s. But it calculates that for us to see if we like that. If we want to go see who that is, we can come back to the data tab and sort on that. Delta tabs. It says, what is the overall right now average Delta score? I said Army score right now last year was 1.4. This pay pool is 0.81. Their scores are less than the Army average. Is that good? Maybe we didn't have a lot of success this year, and that's normal. Maybe we're being too harsh. Maybe we want to go up on some scores. And then it also averages out by supervisor. So if I want to see how one supervisor is comparing to another, see if I have somebody who's scoring too easy or too hard, I have somebody who averaged in the minus range, somebody who averaged at a +5 range. Now, is that right? Let's go take a look. We have that all built into the spreadsheet. What you can also see is, where did we start our pay? Ideally, we'd like everybody to be paid on the standard pay line. That means we're being paid appropriately. When we started this, based on the recommended scores, this looks like most people were recommended to get pay raises. We thought they were underpaid, and a few people were overpaid. But then when we're all done with if we were all done with our pay pool right now, did we make corrective actions? Are more people appropriately paid? We have a tab to show us that. And we say, gosh, look how many more people are now closer to that standard pay line. We don't have so many people by the pink line now. Far more people are over here in the standard pay line region, which is what we want at the end of the pay pool. So there's a lot of info that this spreadsheet gives us, more than we have time in this particular class. I just want to introduce this for us so we can see that. And again, PayPal administrator will get big training on this, and then we'll work this extensively in the mock pay pool. We'll work actually on the spreadsheet and see how this all works in person during our mock pay pool. All right, let me just come back to the slides real quick, and then we will finish our time here. Oops, I don't want that one, sorry. I don't want that one either. It's here somewhere. All right, we'll just get to that. And back to this. All right. Then when you're all done, what is the deliverable out to everyone is an appraisal form. The slide 53 and 54, it's showing like it's like 2 slides, but it's actually 1 piece of paper that for the employee, then this is what the supervisor gives them. They see your approved performance scores. Those should be easy to explain. Right, supervisor recommended the 135. You've already been doing that. We shouldn't really have a lot of controversy there. The categorical scores, and supervisor can fully explain. That's just counting how many descriptors did the employee get credit for. The numeric score, I said, is the one that's a little bit more troublesome because we can't show them where they ranked across everybody else and fully explain that. We show them what scores they got, and then we show them the payouts that they got. The government-wide pay increase, if they got another salary increase in the pay pool, whatever the locality pay is going to be for this new year, whatever cash award they got, contribution award, and if you did carry over any of their CRI to a second cash award, that would be listed here in the carryover area. And then there's a remarks area. If they bought any time off, it will type that out here automatically. It'll say that they cashed in 25% or 50% or whatever percent of their CA for time off and got X number of hours. If you did carry over any of the awards, we'd explain that here in the remarks area so that the supervisor can explain that out to the employee during their appraisal meeting. So that's the form that the supervisor has to work off of with their appraisal meetings, and is generated once your pay pool's all done and the pay pool administrator uploads the data to to CastNet again. These forms are automatically generated and they get released as soon as the AcqDemo program office says everything's been reviewed and we're good to go release these forms. And then those appraisal meetings can happen. All right. That is the end of our time today. What questions, thoughts, comments have you on everything? We covered a lot in 3 hours on how this whole thing works. The good thing is we get to practice it. I'll be in St. Louis. We'll practice in person for the St. Louis pay pool at least. I think the other pay pool may be a virtual, but we'll get a chance to practice all of this coming up yet before we ever get to your real pay pools. What questions, thoughts, comments have you before we end today's session? You know. Rochelle.
Hi. There is still some confusion here within my office. You know, basically, how can we consistently and not randomly assign a final number? We know what their the range is supposed to be, but there's some confusion on how we decide what's better or what's worse than that target score.
So that happens back to the, I'm trying to find this rank ordering slide, this one here. So we're going to say in the pay pool, did anybody get a 4 high categorical score? If so, we have to give out 96 to 100 points. And we'll look at their appraisals of all of those people. We look at the factor discriminators and we rank order them. The person who ranks the highest can get 100 points. Whoever ranks second can get 99 points. Whoever ranks third can get 98 points. We'll do the same thing with 4 medium. We'll do the same thing for 4 low, 3 high. So the first thing we look at in the pay pool is how many descriptors did each employee meet. That puts them into one of the categories: 3 low, 3 medium, 3 high, 4 low, 4 medium, 4 high, etc. Then the next thing we do is, again, reading the appraisals within each category, look at the factor discriminators and use that criteria to rank order them. And again, each factor has different discriminators, but we use the factor discriminators when we rank order. So this is job achievement. The discriminators are leadership, employee development, mentoring, accountability, complexity and difficulty, creativity, and scope and impact. So we would say from this group of 8 people, who showed the best leadership? Let's move them up the list, down the list. So we're not taking them off of their expected score. To do that, we would say we would read their contribution plan, and then we would say, did they meet the contribution plan, they'd get a delta 0. Did they beat the contribution plan, they get a plus score. If they didn't get the contribution plan, they get a minus score. We don't do that. That's a performance management system. We don't do that here. This is a rank order system. So there's no way to say what score somebody's going to get based on just their individual appraisal. It's how within this group, in this case, in this group of 8, how did their mission impact compared to the other 7 people in their same categorical region. And then we rank order them based on mission impact, and mission impact is defined as the factor discriminators. Did that make any sense? If not, what follow-up question could you ask to help me make it more sense?
That helps a little bit. Yeah. Thank you.
Because it's the rank ordering that gets them their numeric score. That's how numeric scores are determined. And that, again, that's the thing we can't fully explain to the employees, like I said earlier. You know, if I'm Rick and I got 81 and I asked, you know, who got 82 and 83, why didn't I get those scores? We can't tell them that. We can't tell him who beat him and why, just like we can't tell him who he beat and why. We can only say, Rick, you got 3 high. And across all the people who got 3 high, you ranked with a score of 81.
So this is Jen Reardon again. I have a question to follow up with Rochelle's question. So when we have the sub pay pools, and let's say we have 4 people that are in the 3 high, and the range goes from 79 to 83. We as a supervisor just decide, should one of those people be an 83 because they're the top of the 4, or do we make our top the 82?
Could be whatever you decide. And in that case, if we don't have enough people to fill up all the slots, like somebody said before, what if we only have 1 person? Then what do we do? Then we have to take it based on their expected score. So let's say that your top person is a current pay of 81. You say, well, they're the top of this list. Should we give them 83? That's a +2. Well, +2, let me just look at numbers here just for sake of story. So 83 is worth 114,149. 81 is 109,707. So that's a difference of about $6,500. So if they're currently at 81, but they're our top ranked person, we have to decide, you know, should they get 81, 82, 83? What should they get? Let's say that we decided they're underpaid. So at 81, because they're ranked at the top of the list, we think they're underpaid. Okay, well then we can choose 82 or 83. If we chose 82, that would be a pay increase of around $2,200. If we chose 83, that's a pay increase of around $4,400. So we're doubling the pay increase. Which one feels better for us? Do we want to give a pay increase of like $2,000 or $4,000? How much are they currently underpaid at the 81? And then we choose 82 or 83 that way, because we don't have enough people to fill up all the slots. So we have to sort of do an extra task to say what number makes the most sense to us. And then everybody else is going to score under that. But because we only have 4 people in 5 slots, 1 slot at least is going to be empty. We don't have to use all the slots. And again, there can be ties. Like this sample, John and Dan tied at number 1, Bruce and Rick tied at number 3. There can absolutely be ties. If we don't feel there's a distinction between them, that they're equal, we can make them equal. But that's why in your business rules are these charts. The numbers I pulled out, like, well, what does 83 mean? What does 81 mean? That chart's actually in your business rules, so that you have that handy for you in the pay pool meeting to say, well, if we made that choice, what does that mean financially? Because again, in the sub pay pool, you don't see the numbers, the dollar numbers, but you have this tool that you really do know what it would mean. Good questions. What other questions have we? All right, Don, not seeing or hearing any at the moment. I guess I turn them back to you until we see you in person. next month.